Chapter 11121, Judgment Day, End. In the dimly lit Wizengamot courtroom, Lawrence recounted a scene that had shattered his understanding of the world. The two men took out a stick, a magic wand, and released the contents of the package. A swarm of black frogs spilled out, and one even leapt into the mouth of the motionless postman. Amelia Bones, who had replaced Fudge as the presiding judge, listened intently alongside the Wizengamot judges, Dumbledore, the Order of the Phoenix, and the three young wizards on trial. All eyes were on Lawrence, a muggle, as he described the events. His hesitant narration was overlooked. The focus was solely on the vivid scenes he painted. As Lawrence continued, anger simmered in Amelia's eyes, and Sirius's eyes twitched with agitation. The members of the Order of the Phoenix were visibly furious, seemingly ready to confront Fudge at any moment. Finally, the postman stopped moving. After confirming his death, the two men in windbreakers suddenly disappeared, Lawrence concluded. And then, Ms. Bones, regaining her formidable composure, asked in a deep voice. I knew the police would arrive soon, Lawrence replied, looking uneasy. I considered telling them what I saw, but I doubted they'd believe me, so I left before they arrived. So, Ms. Bones's voice rose, echoing the question on everyone's mind. Do you remember what those two people looked like? Yes, Your Honor, Lawrence answered confidently. He had been in the courtroom long enough to identify the culprits. When he pointed to Dawlish and another Auror in the fire cage, the uproar was deafening, nearly shaking the courtroom's foundations. I don't, Dawlish screamed in despair. This is a pure frame-up, a conspiracy by Atticus Blaine. The Wizengamot actually believes a foolish muggle. The Wizengamot only believes in the truth, Dawlish. Miss Bones's expression was stern and unforgiving. This was an unprecedented disgrace. Aurors from the Ministry of Magic had killed a muggle to frame Harry Potter. If this scandal were to spread, the British Ministry of Magic's reputation would be irreparably damaged. It's you, Dawlish. Fudge, trapped in a cage, was utterly despondent. He realized there was no escaping the truth. With Amelia uncovering Dawlish's role in the murder, the next step was to determine who orchestrated it all. At that moment, Umbridge, suddenly able to speak, shouted out, her heavily made-up face twisted with disbelief as she pointed a trembling finger at Dawlish. So it was you who did all this, Dawlish. You misled me and Connolly. Yes, that's exactly it. Fudge, initially stunned, was now overjoyed. So, it was you who forged everything and led us to the wrong conclusion. Dawlish's body shook as he stared at his former superiors, who were now casting blame on him. He couldn't fathom their shamelessness. Ah! Remus sighed heavily from the stands, shaking his head in dismay. There's nothing to sigh about, Remus, Alastor remarked with a disdainful smile. Spend enough time in the ministry, and you'll see this isn't uncommon. But they shouldn't be targeting Harry. Sirius's gray eyes were bloodshot as he glared at the three men, his expression fierce. Just wait, now it's their turn to experience Azkaban. While others displayed disdain or satisfaction, Mr. Weasley covered his face with his hands, feeling a deep sense of disappointment. So this was the truth. Harry, having risen from his chair without realizing it, watched the three arguing figures with a blank stare. A blush crept across his cheeks as he absorbed the unfolding drama. Galleons, and Hermione Jane Granger is fined 1,000 galleons. The fines are to be paid within 30 days. A tense silence filled the courtroom as the verdict was delivered. Relief washed over Harry, Ron, and Hermione, though it was tinged with the weight of their penalties. Atticus Blaine's green eyes flickered with a mix of satisfaction and concern as he observed the trio. Dumbledore, standing beside him, gave a subtle nod, acknowledging the complexity of the situation. Atticus had acted decisively, using his wand to silence the three individuals who had nearly revealed too much during their heated argument. Their faces contorted in silent protest, but the courtroom remained undisturbed by their muted cries. Ms. Bones, esteemed members of the Wizengamot, Atticus's voice boomed, pulling Harry back from the brink of his own dark thoughts. Startled, Harry quickly resumed his seat, his mind racing with the implications of the trial. Atticus approached Lawrence, who was visibly burdened by the proceedings, and offered a reassuring pat on the shoulder. I believe you now have clarity regarding the Ministry of Magic's charges against Harry James Potter and the true nature of the murder case, he stated with conviction. The courtroom buzzed with the scandalous revelation. Those affiliated with the Ministry of Magic felt a collective unease. I request the Wizengamot panel to vote on Harry James Potter's guilt concerning the murder of a Muggle, Atticus declared with calm authority. Now, Amelia Bones questioned, her surprise evident. There are still unanswered questions about this Muggle murder, Atticus. The primary suspects in the murder of the Muggle postman have shifted from Harry James Potter to Cornelius Fudge, Dolores Umbridge, Dawlish, and Danforth, Atticus explained. This case warrants a separate trial and should not be conflated with today's proceedings. Seeing Amelia and some of the council members waver, Atticus added, "This involves Cornelius Fudge and Dolores Umbridge. We must tread carefully, Amelia. The integrity of the Ministry of Magic is at stake." "Serious. Atticus is trying to preserve the Ministry's reputation," Alastor interjected, his admiration for Atticus evident. "We may not need Fudge and his undersecretary, but we do need the Ministry's support to combat the Dark Lord's growing forces." On the podium, Amelia quickly grasped the situation. Atticus was strategically avoiding a public spectacle involving Connolly and Dolores. With reporters eagerly awaiting the trial's outcome, any further escalation could prove disastrous. As the trial neared its conclusion, Harry, Ron, and Hermione regained their composure amidst the whirlwind of revelations. They looked to Professor Blaine and Professor Dumbledore, who were in deep discussion with Ms. Bones. Though the murder charge was dismissed, the trio's breach of wizarding law remained unresolved. After a brief consultation, Atticus and Dumbledore descended from the platform, and Ms. Bones conferred with the jury. "I hereby declare," Ms. Bones announced, her voice resonating with authority as she struck the gavel, "in the trial dated July 20th, concerning the Ministry of Magic's charges against Harry James Potter, Ronald Bilious Weasley, and Hermione Jane Granger for violating the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy and the Reasonable Restraint of Underage Wizards Act, Harry James Potter is found not guilty of murder." Before the trio could fully process their relief, Ms. Bones continued with unwavering resolve. "However, given their violations of the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy and the law on reasonable restraint of underage wizards, Harry James Potter is fined 3,000 galleons, Ronald Bilious Weasley is fined 1,000 galleons, and Hermione Jane Granger is fined 1,000 galleons. These fines must be settled within 30 days. The courtroom remained silent, the weight of the verdict settling over everyone present. Galleons, and Hermione Jean Granger is fined 1,000 galleons. The three defendants must pay the aforementioned fines to the Ministry of Magic by the end of July. Additionally, after discussions with the headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry and the director of the Student Safety Office, it has been decided to revoke the Ministry of Magic's previous decision to expel the three from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Surveying the room, Amelia spoke in a solemn tone. "This concludes the verdict. Members of the Wizengamot Judgment Committee, please raise your watches." End of this chapter. Chapter 1122, Swift and Resolute Aftermath. As the votes were tallied, it became clear that over 90% of the Wizengamot members had raised their hands in favor of the decision. More members continued to join in, and Hermione, overwhelmed with relief, covered her mouth and cried tears of joy. "I won't be expelled from Hogwarts," she exclaimed inwardly. Harry, too, felt a surge of elation. "That's fantastic. I only have to pay a fine of 3,000 galleons and won't spend my life in Azkaban," he thought. Ron, however, was less enthusiastic. "A fine of 1,000 galleons?" he muttered, feeling as though he had lost everything. He had just won the prize money from the Triwizard Tournament, and now it was gone before he could even spend a single gold coin. "Sirius, Remus, and you." Atticus Blaine addressed the members of the Order of the Phoenix, who were also relieved by the outcome. "Please escort Harry, Ron, and Hermione back to the old house," he instructed. Despite the trial's conclusion, Atticus's demeanor remained serious and determined. He raised his voice to remind the Order of the Phoenix and the trio, "If reporters approach you, you may share the Wizengamot's decision, but do not disclose any details of the trial." Remus's expression shifted at the mention of secrecy. "I understand, Atticus," he replied. With that, he, Sirius, Amelia, and others helped Harry, Ron, and Hermione up from the dock, swiftly guiding them away before they could utter a word. Arthur, Kingsley, Rufus. Atticus turned to the three men. I need you to gather all department heads and deputy ministers who weren't present at the trial. What are you planning, Atticus? Arthur asked, his voice tinged with hesitation and unease. Just go, Atticus replied firmly, not seeking Amelia's input. Do not speak to reporters or anyone else about what transpired in the courtroom. And Rufus. Atticus directed his gaze toward Rufus. Rufus hesitated, glancing at Amelia for approval. Upon receiving her nod, he stepped forward. Instruct the Aurors you brought to return to the hall and temporarily seal off the Ministry of Magic. No one is to enter or leave. Atticus's usually gentle expression turned stern. The idea of locking down the Ministry of Magic sent a shiver through Rufus, but he nodded silently. Before departing, he cast a glance at the other group of Aurors detained by Atticus. If they haven't committed any other offenses, they won't be held accountable. But Atticus's eyes flickered as he whispered to Rufus, I can't release them just yet in case something happens. Understand? Rufus paused for a few seconds, then nodded resolutely and strode away. Witches and wizards of the Wizengamot, Atticus addressed the members, who were startled by his decisive actions. He bowed slightly. Thank you all for the fair trial today. You understand the gravity of this case, involving both the Minister and Deputy Minister of Magic. We must reach a decision before informing the public. Please bear with us for a moment. The courtroom's atmosphere grew tense once more. Those present were the elite and leaders of the magical world, fully aware of the weight of Atticus Blaine's decisions. Headmaster Dumbledore, Amelia. Atticus gestured for Lawrence, who appeared lost, to sit and rest, then called Dumbledore and Amelia to a corner of the courtroom. Before the senior officials from the ministry arrive, we need to agree on a few matters. You mean? Dumbledore's expression was cautious. I assume you both concur that Cornelius Fudge and Dolores Umbridge should be dismissed? Atticus inquired. There was no room for debate. Dumbledore's eyelids twitched slightly as he nodded, while Amelia glared indignantly at Fudge and Umbridge, who had been thoroughly discredited. Atticus Blaine exhaled deeply, conceding, I agree as well. His gaze was heavy as he turned to Amelia. Someone needs to take charge. It's time, Amelia. Amelia understood the weight of Atticus's words. She had mentally prepared herself for this moment, yet now that it had arrived, she felt a wave of nervousness and hesitation. I have no idea, she admitted. Becoming the Minister of Magic was no simple task. The mysterious figure lurking in the shadows would surely see her as a threat if she assumed the position now. The legal process to become the Minister of Magic involves an election, Atticus explained. Even Amelia Bones, known for her decisiveness and toughness, felt daunted by the immense responsibility that came with the role. I don't recommend rushing into an election now. You'll need to appear frequently in public to give speeches, which is too dangerous for both you and the public, Atticus advised. I suggest you first gain the approval of the various departments and senior officials within the Ministry of Magic. Headmaster Dumbledore and I will support you. You can temporarily take charge as acting minister until the situation stabilizes, then hold a formal election. I believe you are more than qualified for the position, Amelia, Dumbledore said after a moment of silence, offering her a reassuring smile. Amelia still harbored some concerns. What if there are senior officials who disagree? She asked. I trust they will make choices that serve the best interests of the people, Atticus replied calmly. What we need now is unity. During this critical period, we cannot afford to have dissenting voices within the ministry. All right, Amelia said, taking a deep breath and steeling her resolve. Someone has to step up. I will do everything I can. Both Atticus and Dumbledore breathed a sigh of relief. The most troublesome issue, Atticus said, casting a cold glance at Fudge, is how to explain this to the public. We cannot reveal the truth. The Minister of Magic ordered the Aurors to kill Muggles to persecute Harry Potter. If the public knew, the Ministry's regime would be utterly destroyed. We must preserve the Ministry's dignity. What do you suggest, Atticus? Amelia asked, weighing the lesser of two evils. Neither Dumbledore nor Amelia wanted to deceive the public, but the alternative, chaos and anarchy in the British wizarding world, was far worse. You can't tell the truth, but you can't lie either, Atticus said calmly. Dawlish killed the Muggles and blamed Harry Potter to curry favor with Fudge and Umbridge, knowing there was tension between the Ministry and Hogwarts. The Minister and Deputy Minister believed Dawlish's lies and charged Harry Potter. The Wizengamot sentenced Dawlish to life imprisonment, and Cornelius Fudge and Dolores Umbridge resigned. Resigned? Amelia asked, her brow furrowing slightly. This is the statement we present to the wizarding world, Atticus continued. We all know they ordered Dawlish's actions. They cannot escape responsibility and are secretly imprisoned in Azkaban. Inform their families of the truth. I believe they will cooperate with the Ministry to protect their reputations. Dumbledore sighed, realizing he hadn't sighed this much in years. Despite the circumstances, they were effectively orchestrating a coup. Amelia pondered for a moment before speaking. I have no objections. It's theoretically possible, Atticus Blaine mused. But you know, those journalists are adept at uncovering the truth. So we need to take a page from Fudge's playbook, Atticus continued with a sly smile. Fudge brought up Harry's case at this particular moment to deflect the pressure from the Azkaban prison break. We can do the opposite. You mean, Amelia interjected, struggling to keep up with Atticus's line of thought, to redirect attention back to the Azkaban breakout? What are you planning? Dumbledore asked, his tone serious. Atticus's smile sharpened, and he was about to elaborate when the courtroom door swung open. Mr. Weasley entered, accompanied by his team. We'll discuss this later, Atticus said, pursing his lips. Come on, Headmaster Dumbledore. Let's go help Amelia persuade these senior officials at the Ministry. End of this chapter. Chapter 11123. Atticus Blaine's Proposal. As you can imagine, the atmosphere was electric when reporters gathered at the British Ministry of Magic for an emergency press conference. Atticus Blaine, standing at the podium, delivered shocking news. Harry Potter, previously accused of murder by the Ministry of Magic, was innocent. The true culprit was an Auror from the Auror office. The revelation sent the press into a frenzy, especially after the deceived British Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge, and Senior Deputy Minister Dolores Umbridge resigned, narrowly avoiding the wrongful accusation of the famous Harry Potter. The former director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Ms. Amelia Bones, will temporarily assume the role of British Minister of Magic. Mr. Rufus Scrimgeour, the former head of the Auror office, will step in as director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Mr. Kingsley Shacklebolt, previously a senior Auror, will now lead the Auror office, Atticus announced, his voice magically amplified to rise above the reporters' clamor. Rest assured, citizens of the British wizarding community, Atticus continued with conviction. The Ministry of Magic is adopting a new approach to address the escalating situation. We will spare no effort in combating evil forces and strive for a peaceful life for all. As camera flashes lit up the room, Atticus added, Now, please allow Minister Bones to address your questions. Since the start of the summer, Atticus Blaine hadn't had a moment's rest. In the chaotic days following Fudge's resignation and Amelia's appointment, he was so busy that he barely had time for a sip of water. After the press conference, journalists from across Europe who hadn't managed to attend descended upon the Ministry of Magic, which was under strict security measures. One particularly determined young reporter even hid in a bathroom utility closet for 7 hours, leaping out as soon as Atticus entered. Tell me about Cornelius Fudge, Mr. Blaine, the eager, blue-eyed reporter demanded. No one saw him leave the ministry that day, and his home is locked up. Can you tell us where Minister Fudge and Deputy Minister Umbridge and their families have gone? Minister Bones and I have already addressed this, Atticus replied, suppressing his irritation with a forced smile. Minister Fudge and Deputy Minister Umbridge, who have long served the British wizarding world, needed a break. After resigning, they discreetly took their families abroad for a vacation. But where did they go? The reporter pressed, determined to uncover Fudge's whereabouts. They prefer to keep their location private. Understandably, they might feel guilty, given that their mistakes nearly led to Harry Potter's wrongful accusation. Some speculate it was a premeditated coup, Mr. Blaine, the reporter continued boldly. That you and Albus Dumbledore orchestrated a coup and imprisoned Minister Fudge and Deputy Minister Umbridge. Oh, haha, that's pure nonsense, Atticus replied with a kind smile. Even if there are misunderstandings about me, surely you trust the integrity of Headmaster Albus Dumbledore. Can I have some privacy, please? The relentless pursuit by journalists was just one challenge. As the news spread, letters from prominent figures in the wizarding world began to flood in, each demanding answers and clarity. Messages flooded into the Ministry of Magic like a blizzard, all demanding the truth about the trial that had taken place. Companies and workshops with vested interests in Fudge, along with leaders of ancient magical families, descended upon the ministry, insisting on meeting with Minister Fudge. They dismissed the ministry's explanations and adopted a confrontational stance. Without Atticus Blaine and Albus Dumbledore's steady leadership, Amelia Bones might have struggled to manage the situation. Within the ministry, dissenting voices were present but not overly loud. To many, the identity of the minister was inconsequential. However, high-ranking officials who favored Fudge realized they needed to collaborate with Bones to quell the recent chaos if they wished to retain their power. Non-cooperation was not an option, as the ministry's largest armed force was firmly under the control of Kingsley Shacklebolt and Rufus Scrimgeour. No one else had the authority to deploy the Aurors. Even Ludo Bagman, typically lackadaisical, had become unexpectedly industrious, working diligently to stabilize the situation. Atticus Blaine and Dumbledore were the cornerstones of support for Bones' new administration. Their presence silenced most dissenters. A significant coup seemed to be unfolding, yet through the concerted efforts of many, the turbulent situation was gradually stabilizing. "This is from the Greengrass family," Amelia announced. She had moved into Fudge's former office, but hadn't yet altered its opulent decor, which she found distasteful. Atticus, Dumbledore, and Amelia sat around the conference table in the minister's office. Amelia placed the letters she had just received in front of the solemn-looking Atticus and Dumbledore. "Look," Amelia said with a grim expression. "Nearly half of the 28 sacred families, including the Malfoys, Knots, Crabs, Goyles, and Rosiers, have sent inquiries to the ministry. They demand that Fudge publicly confirm his resignation. Otherwise, they threaten to organize a strike in the industries they control, which would cripple the entire Ministry of Magic." Dumbledore, though reluctant to involve himself too deeply in ministry affairs, recognized the necessity of supporting Atticus and the ministry in this precarious situation. Failing to do so would only benefit Voldemort. "Undoubtedly, Amelia," Dumbledore said, picking up Lucius Malfoy's letter of protest. "Voldemort has orchestrated this." "I suspected as much," Amelia replied, glaring at the letters. Atticus exchanged a glance with Dumbledore. Dumbledore hadn't revealed the full truth. The idea of using companies and workshops to strike wasn't Voldemort's brainchild. It wasn't that Voldemort lacked intelligence, but his arrogance blinded him to such strategic considerations. The suggestion had actually come from Josna Rosier, a woman who taught at a Muggle university and possessed a deeper understanding of Muggle history than most wizards. "I think it's time," Atticus said, looking at the letters with a calm demeanor. "We can't let them run amok. We need to create some difficulties for them." Amelia turned to Atticus. "Are you referring to the diversion you mentioned on the day of the trial? What do you propose? Intensifying the hunt for the escaped Death Eaters?" Dumbledore asked, growing accustomed to his role as the Inquisitor. "My approach is a bit more intriguing," Atticus replied with a smile. Under the watchful eyes of Dumbledore and Amelia, Atticus raised a finger and spoke with a serious tone. "We need to hold another press conference to officially announce that the mysterious man has been resurrected and that the evil forces he is associated with are becoming more active every day. We urge the general public to remain vigilant about their personal safety." There was no room for debate on this matter. The foundation of the new government's establishment rested on this point, and neither Amelia nor Dumbledore raised any objections. "Secondly," Atticus Blaine continued, raising his second finger and looking earnestly at Amelia and Dumbledore, "I propose that, after careful consideration, it is time for the Ministry of Magic to cease using Dementors, dark creatures that are fundamentally against human nature." "Stop using Dementors?" Amelia's eyes widened in disbelief. "Yes," Atticus affirmed resolutely. I mean, we should stop using Dementors to guard Azkaban. The original Azkaban prison will be abandoned, and the Ministry of Magic will select a new location to rebuild the wizard prison. End of this chapter. Chapter 11124. Disbanding Azkaban. Stop using Dementors and build a wizard prison somewhere else? Amelia stared at Atticus Blaine in disbelief, wondering if the usually serious Atticus was playing a joke on her. Azkaban, notorious throughout the wizarding world, was guarded by Dementors and served as a formidable tool for the Ministry of Magic to maintain its power and authority. Even a rebellious wizard like Sirius Black would shudder at the mere mention of Azkaban. Yet here was Atticus, suggesting the Ministry abolish it, akin to severing its own arm during a crucial time. "I didn't expect you to propose something like that, Atticus," Dumbledore remarked, momentarily taken aback. However, as he regained his composure, a look of understanding crossed his face. "I have no doubt that this decision will bring joy to many, Atticus." Amelia's expression turned grave as she shook her head slightly. "But without Azkaban, how can we deter evil?" "Except for some unforgivable crimes, the purpose of punishment is to encourage reform, Amelia," Atticus replied, surprising both Amelia and Dumbledore with his unexpected insight. "The Dementors in Azkaban only drive any wizard who might be on the path to redemption further into darkness." Atticus met Amelia's gaze meaningfully. "Let's not even discuss whether using Dementors is humane. Amelia, do you truly believe that Dementors still follow the Ministry's orders?" Amelia was taken aback by Atticus's calm assertion. "I did consider the possibility," Dumbledore admitted after a moment of silence. "After the Azkaban breakout and the loss of the Dementors' bond from the Unspeakables, I was concerned about this very issue." "But," Amelia interjected, quickly grasping the implications of Atticus and Dumbledore's words. She frowned, contemplating the situation. "I can command Dementors using some unique magic I've mastered, but it's not something that can be replicated," Atticus explained. "However, you can see that my control over them is tenuous at best. Only the party who holds the contract can exert strong control, and the Dementors themselves would likely prefer to follow the Death Eater's orders." Seeing Amelia's hesitation, Atticus continued earnestly. "Let me be clear. Dementors are no longer reliable. They may just be pretending to follow the Ministry's orders. If I were Voldemort, I would do exactly that. Let the Dementors feign loyalty, only to betray us at a critical moment." Amelia pursed her lips, acknowledging the validity of Atticus's concerns. It was a plausible scenario. Noticing that Atticus had more to say, Dumbledore's eyes twinkled with curiosity as he gently inquired, "Since you've made this suggestion, Atticus, I assume you've also considered the location and security measures for the new wizard prison?" Amelia paused, weighing the pros and cons, and fixed her gaze on Atticus. A new prison is being constructed deep within the Forbidden Forest. Time was of the essence, and Atticus had no room for evasion. "I've considered this matter before, Headmaster Dumbledore. You might recall that I drove all the Acromantulas living in the Forbidden Forest to its depths." Dumbledore's eyelids twitched slightly, recalling the commotion Atticus had caused not long ago. He hadn't realized it was part of a larger plan. "Using Acromantulas to guard prisoners," Amelia mused, her mind racing. "While Dementors preyed on the souls of wizards, Acromantulas were interested in their bodies, of wizards. Atticus Blaine certainly had no intention of feeding the prisoners to the eight-eyed spider. His aim was merely to use the spider's fearsome reputation as a deterrent against crime. The eight-eyed spider is just one of the many lines of defense in the new prison," Atticus explained. "The prison will be constructed in a secret, undisclosed location deep within the Forbidden Forest. This hidden sanctuary belongs to a group of individuals who are not originally from the British magical world, but wish to integrate into it. These people are generally upright and peace-loving. We communicated with them, and they are willing to guard the new wizard prison for us as part of their integration. They will also be responsible for the spiritual education of the prisoners." "They will?" Dumbledore's silver eyebrows and beard quivered with surprise. "I convinced them," Atticus replied succinctly, then turned to the perplexed Amelia. "I'll explain the identity of this group later, Amelia. The Ministry of Magic can sign a contract with them for a period of 100 years. They will guard the prisoners, and in return, the magical community will provide them with shelter and compensation. These individuals will form a solid second line of defense for the new wizard prison. Amelia's breathing quickened as she struggled to keep pace with Atticus's rapid developments. "So, is there a third line of defense?" she asked, her voice tinged with anticipation. As expected of Dumbledore, he immediately grasped the concept and inquired further. Atticus smiled slightly, his demeanor calm. He raised a finger, pointing first at Dumbledore and then at himself. "The third line of defense is us." The corners of Dumbledore's mouth twitched, and he shook his head slightly. The suggestion was indeed sound. With Atticus stationed at Hogwarts, the new wizard prison would remain secure for at least the next century, barring any failure in their struggle against the dark forces led by Voldemort. "I cannot act alone, Atticus Albus. Abolishing Azkaban and establishing a new wizard prison was a matter of great importance. Even Amelia, the acting minister, couldn't provide an immediate response. I need to communicate with the directors of various departments in the ministry and some deputy ministers to consult their opinions," Amelia said, taking a deep breath. "But I believe they will support it. After all, you are right. Dementors are indeed unreliable. It is better to let them remain quietly in Azkaban prison." "If this resolution passes, Amelia," Dumbledore said solemnly, "when the Azkaban criminals are transferred, Atticus and I should be involved." This was to prepare for any eventuality. Atticus had anticipated this and nodded in agreement. "Announce the resurrection of the Dark Lord and the abolition of Azkaban," Amelia muttered to herself, then suddenly looked at Atticus. "This can indeed calm the turbulent public opinion, but Atticus, how does this relate to your earlier mention of pursuing the previous fugitives?" "That brings me to my third suggestion," Atticus said with a smile. "Amelia, at the next press conference, I hope you can inform the wizarding world that I urge those Azkaban prisoners on the run to abandon their hopes and surrender." "Voluntarily surrender?" Dumbledore asked, narrowing his eyes. With a faint smile and a deep look in his eyes, Atticus slowly revealed the plan he had been formulating for a long time. Dumbledore listened intently. As Atticus spoke, Dumbledore's expression shifted from puzzlement to surprise, then to sudden realization, and even a touch of admiration. In short, his reaction was quite remarkable. End of this chapter. Chapter 1125, Earth-Shattering Revelations. The lazy sunlight filtered through the open windowsill on the third floor of number 12 Grimmauld Place, casting a warm glow. A few sparrows fluttered down from the sky, finding their way into Hedwig's birdcage, pecking at the leftover food scraps inside. The two boys sleeping in the bedroom were disturbed by the commotion, turning over in perfect synchronization to face the wall, pulling their quilts over their heads. However, within 10 minutes, a rapid knock on the door shattered their peaceful slumber. "Harry, Ron, get up!" The knocking grew more insistent, and the boys could no longer pretend to ignore it. Harry let out an impatient groan, tossing back his covers, causing the butterbeer bottles on his bedside table to clink together. Ron finally sat up, yawning and looking bleary-eyed at the door, a string of drool glistening at the corner of his mouth. Click! The door swung open, and the complex aroma of the room hit Hermione like a wave, making her cover her mouth quickly. Behind her, Ginny's expression mirrored Hermione's disgust. "Can't you guys clean up?" Hermione exclaimed, eyeing the beer bottles and half-eaten food scattered across the floor, leaving her with no place to step. "Have you forgotten, Hermione?" Harry yawned lazily, rolling back onto his bed. "It's not just Ron and me. You and Ginny are also responsible for this mess." "True, but you should still clean up," Hermione retorted, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment before her resolve returned. "Hurry up, both of you. Mrs. Weasley is calling us down for breakfast, and we have a lot to do today." Harry remained unmoved, while Ron rubbed his sleepy eyes. "If you mean cleaning the house?" "It's not cleaning," Ginny interjected, glaring at Ron. "It's to celebrate Harry's birthday. We have to decorate the house." "It's for us too, Ron," Hermione added, her tone firm. "Mrs. Weasley wants to take this opportunity to celebrate for the three of us. The members of the Order of the Phoenix have been busy, and they'll be attending the celebration." "I don't see anything to celebrate," Ron grumbled, looking as if he were on the brink of despair. "No need to rush, Hermione," Harry said, still lying motionless on the bed. My birthday is in 5 days. We have plenty of time to clean up. But we still need to go to the Ministry of Magic this afternoon to pay the fine. I hope you haven't forgotten that, Hermione reminded them, her eyes darkening. Harry, who seemed to be in a deep sleep, suddenly sat up, jumping out of bed. That's right, this was something they had discussed long ago. In the days following the trial, the Ministry of Magic was in chaos. Sirius and his colleagues were swamped with work, only managing to send a letter to stop Hermione, who was eager to pay the fine. It wasn't until last night, when Mr. Weasley returned home exhausted, that he informed them that after days of hard work, the situation in the department had improved slightly. They could pay the fine tomorrow, but it would be wiser to go in the afternoon, as reporters were still in the habit of blocking the entrance early in the morning, hoping to catch officials on their way to work. It was still unwise for the three of them to appear in front of reporters. Cornelius Fudge and Dolores Umbridge, these two Ministry of Magic officials, whom Harry despised the most, had stepped down. Even in his dreams, Harry found it hard to believe. As the accused, Harry had participated in the entire trial that day, yet there were many aspects of the proceedings that he and even Hermione couldn't fully comprehend. The only certainty was that Professor Atticus Blaine had been in control of the situation throughout, just as Atticus Blaine had orchestrated the downfall of Fudge and Umbridge, or so it seemed. Since his exoneration, every time Harry recalled the steadfast figure standing before them in the courtroom, his heart swelled with gratitude. This gratitude reached its zenith as they hurriedly dressed and descended to the kitchen for bar, eek-fast. No need to go to the Ministry of Magic today, Mrs. Weasley announced, her voice bright with cheer. Clad in a greasy apron, she stood by the long table, waving a letter at Harry, Hermione, and her children as they gathered for breakfast. Atticus learned from Arthur that you were planning to visit the ministry to pay the fine today. He sent me a letter saying he has already paid it on your behalf. The kitchen fell into a stunned silence. Harry and his friends stared at the letter in Mrs. Weasley's hand, disbelief etched on their faces. Why? Ron exclaimed. Why would he want to help us? Mrs. Weasley's smile softened. Atticus said that Hogwarts bears some responsibility for your actions, as the school hasn't adequately educated you in this regard. Hermione gasped, covering her mouth. That's incredibly kind of him. This isn't a Hogwarts issue at all. And there's more, Mrs. Weasley continued, looking at Harry. Atticus mentioned that you were targeted by the ministry because you donated to the orphanage where he grew up. Although the law is strict, he couldn't let you be punished for your kindness, so he paid the fine. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she sniffed. What a wonderful man. I never knew he grew up in an orphanage. I wish he were my child. He must be around Bill's age. Harry bit his lip, feeling a lump in his throat. The fine from the ministry was insignificant to him. He had refused Sirius's offer to pay it, knowing he had his parents' inheritance, but he couldn't turn down Professor Blaine's generosity. Since we don't have to go to the ministry, Mom, Ron said, his mouth full of sausages, can we go out for a stroll this afternoon? Now that everything's settled, we can't stay cooped up all summer. Mrs. Weasley smiled warmly. I think that's a splendid idea, Ron. We can all go to Diagon Alley together. Even though the Hogwarts book list hasn't arrived yet, I can get you a new set of robes that fit properly. Her words sparked immediate excitement at the breakfast table. Harry's spirits soared. With summer vacation nearly half over, the prospect of visiting Diagon Alley thrilled him. He even tackled the tedious task of cleaning Sirius's old house with newfound enthusiasm. But excessive joy often precedes sorrow, a timeless truth. After lunch, as the Weasley children, Harry and Hermione gathered in the hallway, ready to leave, Remus's sudden appearance cast a shadow over their joy. What's going on, Remus? Harry asked, his smile fading as he noticed Remus's disheveled state. The man was sweating profusely, his eyes wide with panic, a sight Harry hadn't seen in a long time. Remus leaned against the wall, struggling to catch his breath. There's a problem. What is it, Remus? Weasley's face mirrored Harry's concern, her earlier joy replaced by fear. This morning, Minister Bones held a press conference, Remus managed to say, his voice strained as if he were suffocating. Minister Bones officially announced to the wizarding world that Voldemort has been resurrected and is conducting terrorist activities in the UK. She also declared that the ministry has decided to abolish Azkaban and construct a new wizarding prison. The public revelation of Voldemort's return and the plans for a new prison left Harry reeling with shock. Before he could fully process these revelations, Remus continued, "But that's not all." Minister Bones, alongside Amelia, also informed the wizarding community about the criminals who have escaped from Azkaban. You know them: Bellatrix Lestrange, Antonin Dolohov, Adam Vogel, Jasna Rosier, Ivan Rosier, and the Caro siblings. Atticus Blaine stated that these individuals have 3 days from today to voluntarily surrender to the authorities. If they fail to do so, all their assets stored in Gringotts will be confiscated. Remus's voice was sharper than usual, filled with urgency. What's even more astonishing is that the goblins attended the press conference and declared their full cooperation with the Ministry of Magic's actions. The announcement was like a thunderclap, reverberating in everyone's minds. Was Atticus Blaine preparing for a confrontation with Voldemort? In the suffocating silence that followed, Harry suddenly let out a piercing scream and collapsed to the ground, clutching his forehead in agony. End of this chapter. Chapter 111-26. The tension mounts. It was as if a thunderclap had exploded in Atticus Blaine's mind. The deafening noise left him unable to hear the frantic shouts of Remus and the others who had rushed to his side. "Let me die quickly," he thought, as his green eyes, bloodshot and bulging like a goldfish gasping under the scorching sun, reflected his agony. It felt as though a hacksaw was slowly cutting through his head along his scar, the pain indescribable. Blaine, Bones, and the goblin. A sudden flash of green light seared before Atticus's eyes. The malevolent energy within it was so intense that it induced nausea at first sight. Following the green light, a piercing roar echoed in his mind. In a state teetering between consciousness and confusion, Atticus envisioned a large, gray room where Voldemort, his eyes bloodshot with fury, raised his wand high before swinging it down like an executioner's axe. The wizards before him fell lifelessly, not even a scream escaping their lips. Fury, disbelief, and fear. Only Atticus could sense the tumultuous emotions churning within the heart of the most feared dark wizard in British wizarding history. Malfoy was the first to grasp the gravity of the situation. He seized his wife and fled through the grand doors, his actions prompting the trembling Death Eaters to scramble away from the enraged Dark Lord. Even Adam, who had attempted to console him, abandoned his efforts after witnessing the merciless execution of the messenger. Anger and cowardice. Only the splattering green light could slightly quell Voldemort's explosive emotions. "I need to find out what they're planning." A dozen cold corpses lay as a grim comfort to Voldemort's uneasy heart, hidden beneath his rage. He glared outside the door, his high-pitched, icy voice reverberating through the blood-soaked hall. The Death Eaters, who had just fled, returned anxiously, trembling as they awaited the Dark Lord's orders. "Have Severus come see me immediately. I need to know what Blaine is planning," Voldemort hissed angrily, pacing in front of the French windows. 2 minutes later, he halted and cast a cold gaze over his followers. "I will contact Severus for you immediately," Malfoy stammered, his voice choked with fear. "This is a grave provocation to the Dark Lord's authority by Blaine and the Ministry of Magic." Voldemort's bloodshot eyes swept over his disciples, and those who met his gaze quickly lowered their heads, terrified of being punished for any perceived disrespect. "I will show the Ministry of Magic and Blaine the severe consequences of angering me. My Death Eaters, the time has come to defend the Dark Lord and your dignity. Bones and those beasts must be punished most severely." Voldemort's tone was menacing. "Now that the Ministry of Magic has announced the Dark Lord's resurrection, it is time for the wizarding world to once again feel the terror I bring." The Death Eaters, as if granted a reprieve, hastily agreed and departed. "Bella," Voldemort called to a woman with seaweed-black hair. Strangely, as she cowered in fear before the Dark Lord, Atticus found his perspective shifting around her like a camera in a film. Even more unsettling was the sense that the woman could see him. In their brief eye contact, he noticed her fear of him. The pain, which had surpassed his threshold, oddly brought a calm to Atticus's mind. Everything before him was undeniably real, perhaps even unfolding at that very moment. But why could he see Voldemort and his Death Eaters while they remained oblivious to his presence? Why could she see him? After his perspective shifted, why did this female Death Eater, whom he had only seen in the newspaper, seem to recognize him and show fear? Harry pondered these questions, heartbreaking and bone-cutting. The piercing sound of the incantation jolted Harry from his thoughts. The woman's agonizing screams tore at his emotions. Part of him felt reluctant, yet another part felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. "This is your punishment, Bella." Voldemort's cold voice faded, while the anxious calls of Remus and others echoed faintly. Harry was hesitant to leave. He wanted to hear more. "Punishment for your negligence." Harry, what should I do?" Hermione's familiar scream shattered the gray hall in Harry's vision, bringing him back to the warmly lit entrance hall and corridor of number 12 Grimmauld Place. Ron and his twin brothers stood against the wall, bewildered by Harry's sudden condition, staring blankly at him lying on the ground. Hermione, Mrs. Weasley, and Ginny knelt beside him, tears in their eyes, calling out to him. Remus's face was ashen, and he knelt beside Harry, wand in hand, tracing patterns in the air as if casting a spell. "Oh, he stopped screaming," Mrs. Weasley said. "He's still alive. That's terrible." "Oh, Merlin, your magic is working, isn't it, Remus?" "Maybe it has nothing to do with my magic," Remus replied, his face still tense. Harry, can you hear me? There's something wrong with your scar. If you can hear me, blink." Blinking seemed a bit silly, so Harry tried to speak. However, his throat was too hoarse to form coherent words, likely from the screams of pain when he lost control. Resigned, he blinked obediently. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Ron wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, feeling a sense of relief. Alive. I've never seen Harry's scar hurt so badly. Seeing Harry regain his senses, Remus collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. Despite his experience with many crises, Harry's pained expression had frightened him. Hearing Ron's words, he looked over with raised eyebrows. "Does Harry's scar often behave like this?" Ron hesitated, unsure whether to reveal Harry's situation. "Sometimes," Hermione interjected, biting her lip. "Not often, but never this serious." "You need to go to St. Mungo's, Harry," Mrs. Weasley said, her voice trembling with concern, fearing another attack at any moment. "I'm afraid St. Mungo's can't be of much help, Molly," Remus said, taking a deep breath. He wasn't entirely ignorant of Harry's scar. "You just saw something, didn't you?" Remus asked, his gaze piercing into Harry's eyes. "Like what you saw last summer?" What had he just seen? It was undoubtedly the scene where Voldemort was enraged upon learning that Professor Blaine was planning to raid the vaults of his Death Eaters. What would Voldemort do in response? And why did he torture Bellatrix in the end? Had she done something wrong? "I want to see Professor Blaine." Harry suddenly stopped panting, his green eyes fixed on Remus's solemn face. "You want to see Atticus?" Remus frowned, looking hesitant. "You know, Harry, he and Albus are both very busy right now. Minister Bones is struggling to manage the situation alone. Moreover, Atticus just proposed punishment measures for those Death Eaters who escaped from Azkaban. I dare say that Voldemort and his Death Eaters are not the only ones who are reluctant to see the Ministry's actions." "Magic can do this." Harry said nothing, but his expression was resolute. "All right," Remus replied, recognizing the determination in Harry's eyes. He knew further argument would be futile, so he simply pressed his lips together. "I'll send a message to Atticus Blaine for you, Harry, and inform him about your scar. By the way," Remus paused, suddenly aware of something. He glanced around at everyone gathered in the hall. "Where are you planning to go?" "Diagon Alley," Mrs. Weasley interjected. "These kids have been cooped up in the house for a month without stepping outside. Now that their troubles are finally over, I thought it might be nice to let them out for some sunshine, but—" Her voice trailed off as she considered the news Remus had just shared. She looked at the children with an apologetic expression. "I'm afraid our travel plans might be ruined." End of this chapter. Chapter 1127, Escape. In the end, Mrs. Weasley escorted Harry and his friends to Diagon Alley. Remus believed it was crucial to gauge the public's reaction following the Ministry of Magic's announcement of Voldemort's return. As the bustling hub of the wizarding world, Diagon Alley would undoubtedly reflect these changes. "No one is allowed to wander off. Stay close to me," Remus instructed sternly, after sending a letter to Atticus Blaine at Harry's request. I suspect Diagon Alley won't be as peaceful now. Don't worry, Remus. Fred, one of the twins, replied nonchalantly with a grin. We promise to follow orders, just like the workers in your workshop, George chimed in, echoing his brother's playful tone. Remus shook his head in mild exasperation, then turned his attention to Harry and the others. Having witnessed Voldemort's fury in his dreams, Harry was no longer optimistic about the current situation. He met Remus's concerned gaze and shook his head firmly. Let's go, Mrs. Weasley said gently, nudging Ginny's shoulder. We'll meet at the Leaky Cauldron first. With a flash of green fire, Ginny vanished from the kitchen. Fred and George followed closely, and Ron stepped into the fireplace at Mrs. Weasley's urging. Come on, Harry, Hermione said, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder and looking at him with concern. Harry knew she might have guessed that he had seen Voldemort in his dreams again. He forced a smile at her before disappearing into the swirling green flames. The warm flames enveloped Harry, gently propelling him out of the fireplace. He stumbled forward, colliding with the Weasleys, who stood like a wall. Why are you standing here like that? He asked, glancing back at Hermione and Remus as they emerged from the flames. Raising his eyebrows, he maneuvered around Ginny to see what lay ahead. With just one look, Harry's expression froze. The familiar, bustling bar he remembered was gone. In its place was an empty hall. All the tables and chairs were stacked in the southeast corner, reaching the ceiling. The wine rack behind the bar, once filled with greasy bottles, was bare, not even a glass left behind. The bar's owner, the ever-busy old hunchback Tom, was nowhere to be seen. The back door leading to Diagon Alley was boarded up, and the windows were sealed. Only faint white sunlight filtered through the gaps, casting a dim light on the swept floor. Squeak, squeak, squeak! Harry's footsteps echoed on the rotten floor as he looked around in disbelief. The Leaky Cauldron. Hey, look at this! George called out, having reached the bar and picked up a piece of wood. Harry turned to see George holding a worm-eaten, pitted plank with the words "Suspended Business" scrawled on it. Closed? Mrs. Weasley exclaimed, distressed. The Leaky Cauldron. But it was open last time. I bet it hasn't been closed for more than 10 minutes, Hermione observed, surprising Ron. The paint on the sign hasn't dried yet. Remus frowned, about to speak, when a creaking sound came from the stairs leading to the second floor behind the bar. His expression shifted to one of caution as he eyed the dark staircase. Get out your wands! We're not of age yet, Harry. No magic allowed. Hermione reminded sharply as Harry drew his wand without hesitation. The law allows it if you're attacked, Hermione, Remus said gravely. Minister Bones is much more discerning about right and wrong. The person on the stairs seemed to have heard their conversation. The footsteps downstairs came to an abrupt halt. On either side of a fragile wooden wall, two groups faced each other. Atticus Blaine crouched down, scanning the area. It wasn't wise for everyone to cluster together. A sudden attack could affect them all with a single spell. Who's down there? A voice called from the platform, midway up the stairs. The tension in the air eased as the familiar voice reached their ears. Remus Lupin's face relaxed, though he kept his wand at the ready. Remus Lupin, the Weasleys, Hermione Granger, and Harry Potter, he announced. Ed. Ah, Mr. Potter? Old Tom's demeanor shifted upon hearing the name. He descended the stairs with a thud, his large bag floating behind him. He landed with a smile, first addressing Harry with respect. Long time no see, Mr. Potter, and Mr. Lupin. Indeed, it's been a while, Harry replied, casually flicking his wand back into his sleeve. Tom, Remus acknowledged with a nod. We were planning to head to Diagon Alley, but, he gestured towards the sign in George's hand, we found. Yes, Mr. Lupin, I'm afraid the Leaky Cauldron will be closed for a while, Old Tom said, his expression somber. I'm sure you've heard about the press conference this morning by Minister Bones and Mr. Blaine. But what does that have to do with you? Ron asked, puzzled. Old Tom's face grew more solemn. Mr. Weasley, you know this pub is less than a mile from Gringotts, right? So, Ron still looked bewildered. Come and see, everyone, Old Tom beckoned, leading them to a closed wooden door. They stepped into the backyard of the Leaky Cauldron and passed through the red brick wall. Suddenly, the noise and light of the bustling world overwhelmed Harry's senses. Oh my God! Ginny's voice echoed in his ears. prompting him to open his eyes wide and take in the scene. Clang! 2 wagons, laden with large boxes, collided as they jostled for space on the cobblestones. A box tumbled from one of the carriages, spilling several shiny, exquisite flying brooms onto the ground. Firebolt! Ron gasped, recognizing the brooms. The other carriage sped away without a word of apology, while the owner of the Quidditch boutique leapt down, cursing as he and his assistants hurriedly gathered the scattered boxes. Similar chaotic scenes unfolded throughout the street. Harry watched in disbelief as a salesperson from Flourish and Blots, not far away, waved his wand, causing books to fly from the shelves into boxes on a waiting carriage. Nearby, the clerk of the owl shop had already cleared out the store and was hanging a temporarily closed sign on the door. Many shops in Diagon Alley were already shut, while others were in the midst of packing up. Remus, and you all? Amidst the clamor, Harry recognized a familiar voice. Mrs. Weasley exclaimed, leaving Ginny's side to embrace the thin wizard escorting a cart nearby. Hello, Mom. Percy returned the hug briefly, before turning to Remus. The situation is urgent. We've decided to evacuate our store in Diagon Alley. We haven't had time to report yet. It was wise to retreat, Percy, Remus said, nodding in approval. What on earth is happening? Ron asked, bewildered by the apocalyptic scene. Isn't it obvious? Percy replied, surprised at Ron's confusion. Since Professor Blaine has decided to confront you-know-who in Diagon Alley, they must. Certainly. Here's an improved version of the text. Flee! End of this chapter. Chapter 11128. Right or Wrong. Old Tom had left, and nearly every shop in Diagon Alley was in a frenzy, hastily moving their goods out. In the distance, the Hogwarts Express had come to a halt at the Diagon Alley station, billowing thick white smoke into the clear sky. Everyone remembers the battle between Professor Blaine and the Dark Witch at the Quidditch World Cup final, Percy said gravely, as he and several others stood by the window of Fox's ice cream shop, observing the chaos outside. The Ministry has announced to the wizarding world that you-know-who has been resurrected, and the prisoners who escaped from Azkaban are all notorious Death Eaters. People believe that you-know-who will not let this go unpunished, and will seek revenge. If you-know-who and Professor Blaine clash in Diagon Alley, the consequences will be devastating. Harry's eyes widened with understanding, finally grasping why everyone was in such a rush to evacuate. Objectively, their concerns were not unfounded. He had witnessed the destruction firsthand during the Quidditch World Cup when Professor Blaine battled Cleona. The memory of that cataclysmic scene was still vivid in his mind. If Professor Blaine and Voldemort were to duel in Diagon Alley, the place would undoubtedly be reduced to ashes. Hasn't Professor Blaine considered this possibility? George, one of the twins, asked, his usual humor replaced by anxiety as he surveyed the deserted shops. If Diagon Alley is destroyed, where will wizards conduct their business? Hogsmeade can't compare to this place. Having endured this ordeal, Percy appeared more composed than before. Some shop owners have already lodged complaints with the Ministry, but I doubt Professor Blaine will be swayed by their objections. Harry, Hermione, and Ron exchanged glances, remaining silent. Among the young wizards at Hogwarts, they knew Professor Blaine well. Once he made a decision, he was not easily deterred. Yet George's point was valid. If Diagon Alley were destroyed, where would they purchase textbooks and magical supplies? Where would new students buy their wands? This decision by Atticus and the Ministry, Mrs. Weasley said worriedly, isn't it a bit reckless? Of course, it's necessary to stand against the Dark Lord. Even Remus was pondering this dilemma. If Diagon Alley were to be ravaged by war, how would the losses of these shops be compensated, and what would become of the lives of the people? What are those people doing? Ron asked, breaking the silence as he pointed to a long line of wizards resembling migrating ants in front of the grand white building nearby. They're likely withdrawing their gold from Gringotts, Remus replied after a quick glance. They're worried their gold might be at risk. Is it just about their gold? Harry asked, puzzled. Remus shook his head slightly, his tone serious. You know that fines are a common form of punishment used by the Ministry, right? Harry nodded, recalling that he was supposed to pay a fine that afternoon. But, as far as I know, there's no precedent for confiscating the personal assets of criminals, Remus continued. What does that mean? Ron asked, still confused. It means, Hermione said, her eyes wide with realization, that your money no longer entirely belongs to you. If you commit a crime, Ron, and the Ministry deems it serious enough to warrant the confiscation of all your personal assets, they can simply take your gold from Gringotts and confiscate it without having to go through you. Before Ron could respond, Hermione bit her lip, her gaze fixed on the long queue in front of Gringotts. Doubt clouded her brown eyes. But why would the goblins cooperate with the Ministry's decision? Isn't this extremely damaging to their reputation? Harry blinked, suddenly understanding Hermione's concern. He recalled his first visit to Diagon Alley with Hagrid years ago. Hagrid had described Gringotts as the safest place to hide something outside of Hogwarts. At Gringotts, private property was considered inviolable. The goblins on Lie allowed the original owners or their heirs to access the wealth in the vaults, and the Ministry of Magic's orders held no sway over them. Yet now, they were actively cooperating with the Ministry's punishment, willingly handing over the gold kept by Death Eaters who had escaped from Azkaban. This would undoubtedly lead many to believe that Gringotts was no longer neutral or infallible, a severe blow to the goblins' banking business. The goblins must have received significant benefits from Atticus Blaine and the Ministry, Remus thought, his eyes sparkling. Otherwise, given the goblins' nature, they would never jeopardize their own wealth. However, Remus kept these thoughts to himself. I don't quite agree with the Ministry's approach, Percy said seriously, observing the wizards anxiously waiting to conduct their business. Miss Bones's appointment as acting minister was too hasty, and many people oppose it. This decision by the Ministry will only incite further opposition, which is unwise. I see it differently, Percy, Remus replied, shaking his head. The Ministry of Magic is in turmoil due to Voldemort's return. Order is at its weakest, and many wizards who once followed the rules may now harbor evil thoughts. Atticus Blaine's assistance in securing this right from the goblins serves as a severe deterrent to those wavering. It could help reduce crime if people fear their gold being confiscated by the Ministry. But couldn't those people just take their gold home? Harry asked. Why not keep it themselves instead of trusting the goblins? These are turbulent times, Harry, Remus said calmly. Keeping a large sum of gold at home isn't wise. Comparatively, goblins are undoubtedly more professional in safeguarding wealth. Moreover, if you have no intention of committing a crime, there's nothing to fear, right? Harry fell silent, then nodded in agreement. They headed to Madame Malkin's robe shop, only to find it closed. Through the transparent glass window, Harry saw that Madame Malkin had removed all the fabrics, leaving only some gray, unsold ready-made clothes hanging on the shelves. Although the measures were meant to counter Voldemort and his followers, the scene before him weighed heavily on Harry. It seemed as if overnight, the wizarding world had shifted from peace and tranquility to endless turmoil. This unease even made Harry miss Fudge a little. At least, Fudge had been adept at concealing the truth. However, Harry quickly dismissed this foolish notion. Even if he questioned Professor Blaine's drastic response, he couldn't align himself with Fudge, especially since Fudge had nearly sent him, Ron, and Hermione to Azkaban. They wandered around Diagon Alley for a while, finding few shops open for business. Even in times of crisis, people still needed to protect their assets. 3 days from now, the Ministry will transport the Death Eater's wealth in the morning. By then, you-know-who may be preoccupied with Atticus Blaine and Dumbledore, but he will undoubtedly dispatch his Death Eaters. This is evident to anyone with a discerning eye. Let's head to Gringotts, Mrs. Weasley suggested to the disappointed children. I've never had the opportunity to deposit Ron's winnings into the vault. I suppose now I can do so without having to queue up. End of this chapter. Chapter 1129, Encounter. In the grand and solemn hall, goblins sat behind 2 rows of long tables that stretched the length of the room, managing the wizard's wealth with an air of elegance. This was Harry's previous impression of Gringotts. However, today, Gringotts was markedly different. A long queue snaked in front of the hall, a silent warning of greed, and every wizard's face was etched with anxiety and unease. Harry observed that most of these individuals were dressed in fine clothes and adorned with jewels. He shared his suspicions with Remus, who merely twitched the corners of his mouth into a slightly contemptuous smile. "Excuse me, gentlemen and ladies." A nervous goblin with a dark green complexion hurried over when he noticed they had no intention of joining the queue, forcing an awkward smile onto his face. "As you can see, if you intend to withdraw money—" "Oh, actually—" Mrs. Weasley clutched her pocket tightly, feeling slightly uneasy under the curious gazes of those in line. "I'm going to deposit some gold in my vault." Saving gold at a time like this? Not only were the onlookers taken aback, but even the goblin who greeted them appeared stunned. "Is there a problem?" Remus asked calmly. "Have the goblins suspended this service?" "You are Mr. Remus Lupin?" The goblin recognized Remus and immediately adopted a more respectful demeanor. "Of course not. Please follow me, ma'am." "I've never seen a goblin act like this towards our family," Ron muttered to Harry, noting the goblin's attentiveness. Harry, however, remained silent, narrowing his eyes as he focused on the front of the hall, where several goblins who appeared to be supervisors were attending to a group of customers. "Look," Harry nudged Remus gently, directing his attention to the scene. "Lucius Malfoy." Remus was momentarily taken aback, then his expression grew more vigilant. "And Greengrass and Old Knot, those two are right, Old Crab and Old Goyle. Draco Malfoy and his mother are here too. Remember, Harry, we met them at the Quidditch World Cup." Ron frowned. "What are these people doing here?" "Is that even a question, Ron?" Hermione said sadly. "They must be here to move their vaults. They don't trust the goblins anymore." "No." Harry's face turned pale as the scenes he had witnessed earlier that morning flashed through his mind. "They're here to cause trouble for Professor Blaine. Let's go and take a look, Remus." "Harry, don't act rashly." Remus's expression changed suddenly, but before he could restrain Harry, Harry had already left the line, quickly bypassing the goblin leading the way, and headed towards the front of the hall. "Don't worry, Remus," George reassured him, patting his shoulder. "Malfoy wouldn't dare to pull any tricks with so many eyes watching." As he spoke, he quickened his pace to catch up with Ron and Hermione, who were following Harry. "I am disappointed, very disappointed." From a dozen feet away, Harry caught the haughty voice of Lucius Malfoy rising above the clamor. "No matter what, I must remove all the Malfoy family's wealth from here today. But, Mr. Malfoy, I'm afraid it will be difficult for you to transport so much gold at once." Bogrod wiped the cold sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief and bowed respectfully. "Don't worry about that. I brought the carriage myself," Lucius snapped, slamming his cane in anger. "You just need to load the gold from the Malfoy family vault into boxes and bring it up from underground as soon as possible." Of course, of course." The goblin wiped his brow and smiled. "That is your wealth. You have every right to take it. But just what?" Narcissa asked arrogantly, her fingers carefully combing through Draco's hair, not even sparing the goblin a glance. "You two must know that the Malfoy family vault stores. The vast wealth amassed by the Malfoy family was enough to overwhelm the goblins tasked with counting it. If," Bogrod gasped, "we could just have a bit more time." "I repeat," Lucius Malfoy interrupted, his tone turning icy, "I demand the immediate removal of all treasures deposited here by the Malfoy family before today." A cold glint flashed in his gray eyes. "The trouble you foresee stems from the goblins' foolish decisions, not from my actions." The goblins, sweating under Lucius's stern gaze, nodded and smiled apologetically. "And our wealth," added a middle-aged wizard with a distinguished mustache standing beside Lucius, his voice equally cold, "from the Greengrass family vault must also be withdrawn today. I refuse to let Gringotts hold my gold any longer." The entourage accompanying Lucius Malfoy voiced their demands one after another, nearly causing the goblin supervisors to faint from the pressure. "Almost half of Gringotts' underground vaults are filled with the wealth of these families," Harry overheard, listening intently. Remus had approached him unnoticed, placing a firm hand on Harry's shoulder, his expression grave. "If they lead the charge in withdrawing their gold, Gringotts will face a crisis. Trust in the bank will erode, and no one will entrust their gold to the goblins again." "Didn't the goblins consider these consequences when they followed the Ministry's orders?" Ginny asked, her voice tinged with worry. "Will they abandon Professor Blaine's plan under pressure?" As long as the Ministry of Magic supports Gringotts, there's no risk of collapse. Percy reassured. Moreover, not everyone will withdraw their gold. For instance, our learning machine workshop will keep its profits in the local Gringotts branches. The intention was to use Gringotts to pressure the escaped Death Eaters into surrendering, but the unintended panic was widespread. Did Professor Blaine overlook these consequences, or did he simply not care? Hermione pondered this when she suddenly felt several curious gazes upon her. A middle-aged witch was staring at her with uncertainty, but upon noticing Harry's scar, her expression shifted to one of excitement. "Oh my goodness," the witch exclaimed. "You're Hermione Granger, representing Hogwarts in the Triwizard Tournament, and this must be Harry Potter." The witch, with short brown curly hair, approached them eagerly. "Could you sign your names for me?" she asked, clutching Hermione and Harry's sleeves with enthusiasm. "My daughter Winnie is a huge fan. She's always wanted your autographs, but I lack the connections." Her light green eyes sparkled with hope as she looked at them. Harry regretted not bringing his invisibility cloak, which would have made eavesdropping much easier. He was trying to extricate himself from the autograph-seeking witch when he heard a slightly hoarse female voice call his name. Startled, Harry turned towards Lucius Malfoy. The group had noticed them, ceasing their negotiations with the goblins to fix them with cold stares, except for Draco. For some reason, when Draco met Harry's gaze, he didn't smirk. Instead, his face turned pale, and he took a half-step back, hiding his left arm behind his back, as if concealing something. What was Draco trying to hide? Harry considered this briefly before dismissing it. He frowned at the witch who had called his name. The moment he met her fanatical gaze, his scar seared with pain, causing his eyes to twitch involuntarily. End of this chapter. Chapter 1130, The Death Eater's Plan. Harry suddenly clutched his slightly stinging scar, his eyes widening in astonishment as he looked at the witch mingling with Malfoy's group. She was plain-looking, and Harry was certain he had never seen her before. Yet when someone called his name, the witch's eyes lit up with a fanatic gleam. "Is it him?" she asked, her voice tinged with excitement. Harry watched as she grabbed Draco's arm with such force that even Draco winced in fear and pain. "That's Harry Potter, isn't Draco?" Draco seemed terrified of the witch. He hesitated, clearly torn between fear and the truth. Let go of my son, Bethel." Narcissa's voice was sharp, her expression a mix of shock and anger as she seized the witch's wrist. "What do you want, Bethel?" Lucius reacted swiftly, his eyes narrowing as he glared at Bethel. "You promised me not to." "Tell me, Draco, is that Harry Potter?" Bethel ignored the Malfoy's protests and Draco's fear, her grip on Draco's arm unyielding, her eyes alight with excitement. "What's wrong with that woman?" Ron whispered, frowning. "It's odd for someone hanging around Malfoy to be a fan of yours, Harry." "I'm afraid not," Harry replied, his lips pursed as he met the witch's gaze, a sense of déjà vu washing over him. Finally, Draco nodded reluctantly. The moment he confirmed it, Bethel's eyes glowed red, her smile turning ferocious and bloodthirsty as she moved toward Harry. "What do you intend to do?" Remus stepped in front of Harry, his gaze sharp and protective. "Oh," Bethel sneered, only now noticing Remus. Her expression twisted with recognition. "This world is truly despicable. How dare a filthy, lowly wolf cub show his face before a wizard?" "Apologize," Harry shouted, his wand drawn and pointed at the witch. "Apologize to Remus now." "Don't be rash, Harry," Remus cautioned, gripping Harry's wrist. "Remember, you're not yet an adult." "Oh, are you going to attack me?" Bethel laughed wildly, her voice shrill. "I want to see what you're capable of." "Bethel." Lucius's voice was furious as he restrained Bethel's shaking wrist, his face livid. "Don't forget our agreement." "I don't care. This is Harry Potter, and I want him," Bethel shouted, but Lucius's near-roaring voice silenced her again. "Shut up, Bethel. Even if you keep your promise to me, can you?" Lucius's chest heaved with anger as he whispered something into Bethel's ear. Harry noticed the witch's bloodshot eyes, filled with murderous intent, reluctantly soften as if she was convinced. "Just wait, little cutie," Bethel taunted, licking the corner of her mouth with a red tongue. "One day, I'll twist your head off with my own hands." "Am I to understand that you are threatening an underage wizard still studying at Hogwarts without any reason?" Remus's voice was firm, his grip on Harry unwavering as he stared down Bethel. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Bethel spat on the marble floor, her footprints leaving a messy trail. She turned her head and shouted fiercely, "Hurry up, Lucius. I don't want to waste any more time here." Lucius was seething, barely containing his rage, but he turned his attention back to the goblins. Clearing his throat, he addressed Bogrod coldly. "I hope you can expedite this process. Besides the Malfoy family vault, you should know that my wife's personal vault contains treasures inherited from Mrs. Walburga Black, which also need to be retrieved." "Mrs. Walburga Black?" Harry's eyes widened in shock. "That's Sirius's mother," Hermione whispered into Harry's ear. "Sirius told us that after his mother passed away, she left all the Black family's wealth to his two cousins." "I know." Harry's green eyes flared with anger. Sirius had shown them the large tapestry in the living room of number 12 Grimmauld Place, where they learned that Draco's mother was Sirius's cousin. The other woman who inherited the Black family's original wealth was Bellatrix Lestrange, who had escaped from Azkaban. Harry suddenly looked startled. He had seen Bellatrix in visions earlier that morning. She had been punished by Voldemort for failing to safeguard something important. Of course, Bogrod chuckled. "That is your right, Mr. Malfoy. In addition to this, I will also claim the share of the Black family fortune that my sister inherited," Narcissa declared, pulling a twisted walnut wand from her pocket. "She entrusted this to me for safekeeping." Before Harry could feel anger at Narcissa's indifference when mentioning the wealth that rightfully belonged to Sirius, a sudden thought made him shudder. "What's the matter with you, Harry?" Remus, who was holding Harry's wrist, immediately noticed his trembling. He glanced over and saw Harry's slightly pale cheeks flushed. Harry stared blankly at Narcissa, who was negotiating with the goblin and the witch named Bethel. "You mean?" The goblin, who had been nodding and bowing, was taken aback by Narcissa's request. It nervously rubbed its slender fingers. "You intend to open Lady Bellatrix Lestrange's vault, Mrs. Malfoy? Any questions?" Narcissa replied coldly. "This is the voucher to open that vault. Do you suspect it's fake?" The mention of opening Bellatrix Lestrange's vault left Remus and the Weasley family stunned. "We can't let her do this," Harry whispered urgently. "They're after something in that vault." Remus frowned. "What do you mean, Harry?" "You must know, Mrs. Malfoy," Bogrod said, glancing sideways at Bethel. "Miss Lestrange's notice from the Ministry, her vault. This doesn't seem appropriate." "Of course, I know you made a foolish decision," Narcissa retorted contemptuously. "The Ministry and the goblins are after the wealth of the ancient house of Lestrange, aren't they? But what I want to take is the property of the Black family. Walburga entrusted that wealth to me and Bella, and I must protect it from you greedy goblins. As for the Lestrange family property inherited by Bella, you can have it. Relying on the support of Dumbledore and Blaine." The goblin named Bogrod was in a quandary. "Is there anything wrong with this? Are you going to take the Black family's wealth too?" The people accompanying Lucius also moved in, their expressions grim, surrounding the goblin. End of this chapter. Chapter 1131. Come here. Before Walburga passed away, she specifically instructed me to safeguard the wealth accumulated by the Black family over the centuries, Narcissa declared, her gaze fixed intently on the goblin. "I promised her I would protect the Black family's fortune. You must understand, I cannot allow the hard-earned legacy of the Black ancestors to fall into the hands of the Ministry of Magic." But, the elderly goblin removed his glasses, wiping away the sweat that had gathered on his brow. "Since the legacy is in Bellatrix Lestrange's vault, what's the problem?" Narcissa interrupted, raising her walnut wand with a sharp edge to her voice. "I brought the necessary documentation, didn't I? Besides, I'm not asking you to hand over the Lestrange family's treasure." Harry's blood boiled at the audacity of the Death Eater discussing wealth that rightfully belonged to Sirius. He could hardly stand it. "What do you want to tell us, Harry?" Remus asked, turning Harry to face him and searching his eyes intently. "You don't want the black gold to fall into the hands of the Malfoys? Seriously, Harry, you'd be mistaken to think Sirius would care about that." "Of course, I know Sirius wouldn't care," Harry retorted angrily. "But he definitely wouldn't want it to fall into the hands of the Death Eaters. That's not what I'm talking about." Harry pulled Remus aside, ensuring their conversation remained private. The Weasley children, along with Hermione, formed a protective circle around them. Just now, when my scar was hurting, Harry glanced at Malfoy and his group, who were still negotiating with the goblins. I saw Voldemort. He knows how Professor Blaine and the Ministry of Magic plan to deal with him. He was furious and killed many people. He ordered the Death Eaters to take action. But that's not the most important thing. Harry took a deep breath and continued quickly. I saw Voldemort torturing Bellatrix as punishment for her negligence. Voldemort had ordered the Death Eaters to act, punishing Bellatrix for her failure. Now, they were witnessing this group at Gringotts attempting to move gold from their vaults, specifically targeting Bellatrix's vault. Remus realized something was amiss. Could Voldemort have hidden something crucial in Bellatrix's vault? The Malfoys have always kept their promises. Lucius Malfoy's voice suddenly cut through the air. Since my wife has vowed to protect the wealth, we must honor our word. To this end, we are willing to make some concessions. Malfoy maintained a cold demeanor. If you truly lack the manpower to retrieve the gold from the Malfoy family's vault, then first transport the gold that originally belonged to the Black family. Bogrod's eyes widened in surprise. He instinctively wanted to agree, but before he could speak, he hesitated and said with embarrassment, "Thank you for your understanding, Mr. Malfoy, but, well, you know, the Ministry has issued a directive, and headquarters requires our full cooperation." "What are your conditions?" Lucius, familiar with the goblin's tactics, inquired. "Oh, I dare not impose any demands on you, Mr. Malfoy, but—" A flicker of joy crossed Bogrod's wrinkled face as he glanced at Greengrass, Old Knot, and the others with feigned embarrassment. Malfoy immediately grasped the situation, exchanging knowing glances with Old Knot and the others. "I have no authority to dictate how anyone manages their coffers, you see, Bogrod," Lucius Malfoy said, his expression unreadable. "But if you can assist my wife in keeping her promise, I can attempt to persuade them." The smile that spread across the old goblin's face made Harry's heart clench with unease. "Remus!" Harry exclaimed, raising his eyebrows. "All right, let's give it a shot." With determination etched on his face, Remus made up his mind. "Come with me, Harry," he said, wrapping an arm around Harry's shoulders and striding purposefully toward Malfoy and his entourage. "Hold on, everyone. I don't think this matter has been handled properly," Remus called out. Malfoy and his group, who were about to descend to the underground vault with Bogrod, halted in their tracks. As Remus and Harry approached, Lucius Malfoy's gray eyes flickered with a momentary relief, but his expression quickly shifted to one of cold vigilance. He raised a hand to stop Bessel, who had already drawn her wand with a grin, and stared at Remus and Harry with an impassive face. "What advice do you have for us?" Malfoy inquired. "I'm sorry. We didn't mean to eavesdrop on your conversation," Remus began, "but I couldn't help overhearing something about the Black family's legacy." "Oh, I must say, your ears are quite sharp," Malfoy replied with a sneer, his gaze fixed indifferently on Remus. "But what does this have to do with you?" Lucius's words elicited laughter from his companions, and the witch named Bessel cast an admiring glance at him. "It really has nothing to do with me," Remus admitted, applying a bit more pressure on Harry's shoulder to keep him calm. He maintained his composure, unfazed by Lucius' insult. "But I feel compelled to speak on behalf of the young man beside me." Lucius narrowed his eyes, feigning interest in Remus's words. "I assume you all know who he is? Harry Potter, right?" Remus said, gently nudging Harry forward. "So what?" Narcissa Malfoy scoffed, casting a disdainful glance at the scar on Harry's forehead. "Do you expect us to revere a boy with an unsightly scar?" "That's not necessary," Remus replied. "You know he's Harry Potter, which is no surprise. However, you might not be aware that Harry is also the godson of Sirius Black, the last male of the Black family. He has a rightful claim to the Black family estate. So, since you're discussing the Black family's inheritance, I think—" "That's absurd," Narcissa interrupted, glaring at Harry with anger. "Sirius Black's godson, even Sirius Black himself, isn't qualified to discuss this matter with me, while Burgess will clearly left everything to Bella and me." "Oh, I'm well aware," Remus said, unfazed by Narcissa's cold demeanor. "I have no objection to your share of the will, but—" he paused. "I doubt Mrs. Black knew Bellatrix Lestrange was a deranged Death Eater when she included her in the inheritance. Did she? If she had known—" Snap! The witch named Bessel's expression twisted into one of fury. She swiftly drew her wand from her sleeve, ready to strike. "Watch out, Remus!" Harry shouted, having been wary of Bessel. As soon as she moved, Harry reacted instantly. When Bessel's wand aimed at Remus, Harry's wand was already trained on her eyes. Fred, George, and the others behind Harry were only a step slower. They rushed to his side, drawing their wands and facing off against Malfoy and his group. "Oh, everyone, please remember, this is Gringotts," Bogrod lamented quietly, his voice weak. In the past, wizards would never dare to brandish wands in the Gringotts Hall. However, the Ministry of Magic's recent actions had severely damaged the goblins' credibility, diminishing the respect they once commanded. The bustling hall fell silent, and the wizards, previously absorbed in their own affairs, now watched the confrontation with surprise. "I think," Remus began, as a tense atmosphere enveloped the hall. As tensions rose within the halls of Gringotts and a conflict seemed inevitable, Atticus Blaine's calm voice suddenly echoed from the doorway. "Are you all fighting?" End of this chapter. Chapter 1132, Major Mistake? A chorus of voices erupted simultaneously, echoing through the grand hall. Among them were Harry's group, the bustling merchants, and the goblins of Gringotts. After the initial respectful greetings, the once noisy hall fell into a hushed silence. The crowd instinctively parted, creating a clear path for Atticus Blaine. As he walked slowly, the eyes of those around him were filled with awe and curiosity. What truly transpired in the courtroom on the day Harry Potter faced trial by the Ministry of Magic? How did Fudge's downfall come about? How did Amelia Bones withstand the immense pressure from her pureblood family to ascend to the position of Minister of Magic? Those privy to the truth remained tight-lipped, yet speculation abounded, linking these events to Atticus Blaine. Undoubtedly, Blaine was the most formidable wizard in the British wizarding world, surpassing even the new minister, Amelia Bones, in magical prowess. Harry noticed that the wizards who had been grumbling about Gringotts' decisions ceased their complaints upon Blaine's arrival. Instead, they showed their utmost respect for Professor Blaine. Glancing at Malfoy's group, Harry observed their tense expressions, their faces turning a shade of green, save for one individual. "Why are you here, Atticus?" Remus was the first to recover from the surprise. He stepped forward, a hint of astonishment in his voice. "Oh, didn't you send a message via Patronus saying that Harry had something important to discuss with me?" Atticus raised an eyebrow, his tone calm. "Ah, that's true, but I thought," Remus began, but even Harry was taken aback. Despite the Ministry of Magic being embroiled in complex affairs, he hadn't expected Professor Blaine to respond so promptly to the message. "Oh, of course." Atticus winked at them, a playful smile on his lips. "I just took the opportunity to come out and take a break." Harry's lips pursed at the remark, realizing he shouldn't have had extra expectations. Atticus's gaze shifted past Remus, landing on Malfoy's group. The arrogance he displayed earlier was now replaced with a composed demeanor. Malfoy and his companions lowered their heads, shoulders hunched, avoiding Atticus's gaze. "Ah, Draco." Atticus's eyes settled on Draco, who appeared flustered, caught between Lucius and Narcissa. A gentle smile graced Atticus's face. "How was your summer vacation?" Draco, attempting to minimize his presence, paled. He nodded hesitantly. "Hello, Professor." Harry narrowed his eyes at Draco's timid demeanor, while Ron, standing behind him, raised an eyebrow and nudged Hermione with his elbow. Hermione, however, responded with a stern glare. Atticus smiled and nodded, seemingly oblivious to Draco's unease. He turned his attention away from Malfoy and his group, focusing instead on Bogrod. "Is everything going well, Bogrod?" "There are some minor problems, Mr. Blaine," Bogrod replied with a strained smile. However, under Atticus's calm and authoritative gaze, he straightened his posture. "Of course, we can overcome this, and Gringotts UK will firmly support the Ministry of Magic and your decisions." Despite his words, the old goblin's eyes flickered towards the Malfoy couple. With Atticus Blaine's arrival, the Death Eaters realized their plan had utterly failed. Now, they could only hope the goblin wouldn't reveal their attempt to access Bella's vault to Blaine. Unfortunately for them, Harry noticed their furtive glances at the goblin. "Professor," Atticus Blaine. Harry faced the stern gazes without flinching and declared, "They intend to open Bellatrix Lestrange's vault and seize half of the gold belonging to the Black family. However, I recall the Ministry has already announced that if the Death Eaters who escaped from prison do not surrender voluntarily, their assets in Gringotts will be confiscated. The silence in the Gringotts hall was so profound that Harry's voice echoed loudly. "You damned little brat!" Bessel shrieked, flicking her wrist to cast a curse at Harry. "Don't be rash. Bah!" Essel, her audacious move alarmed those around her, who quickly restrained her arms to prevent a grave mistake. "Do you want to get us all killed?" Lucius snatched the wand from Bessel's hand, glaring at her with clenched teeth. "Let me go, Lucius." Bessel's face twisted with fury as she struggled. "I will kill him. That damn brat ruined." "Silence!" Lucius bellowed. "If you don't want to ruin everything, shut up!" "Who do you think you are, Lucius? How dare you? Ugh!" Bessel continued to curse, but Narcissa swiftly waved her wand, sealing Bessel's mouth. Atticus Blaine observed the woman, still struggling under the grip of several people, and gave her a provocative look. A peculiar expression flickered in his eyes, yet he maintained a calm demeanor that puzzled Harry and the others. "Apologies, Mr. Blaine," Lucius said breathlessly, nodding at Atticus. "It's not as Mr. Potter claims. We fully support the Ministry of Magic and your decision. We merely thought that perhaps the Ministry only intended to confiscate the wealth belonging to Bellatrix Lestrange and the portion of the Black family's wealth she inherited." "Ha-ha! Cunning, Malfoy," Atticus chuckled. "You're trying to exploit a loophole in the announcement, hoping to keep the gold, aren't you?" Greengrass, Old Knot, Crabbe, Goyle, and others all exhaled in relief, and even Bessel ceased her struggle. "Apologies, Mr. Blaine." Lucius's gray eyes gleamed as he looked at Atticus, slightly lowering his eyelids and leaning forward. "I can tell you right now, Lucius," Atticus said, "regardless of the origin of the wealth in the vault, since it resides in Bellatrix Lestrange's vault, if she does not surrender by the deadline, the Ministry of Magic will confiscate her wealth as punishment. Do you understand?" "We will heed your warning," Lucius nodded promptly. "In that case, we'll take our leave." With that, under the watchful eyes of many, Malfoy and his group swiftly exited the hall. "We can't let them go, Professor Blaine," Harry exclaimed, seeing that Professor Blaine had no intention of stopping them. He hurried to Atticus, leaning close to his ear and speaking with urgency. "That woman, Professor, the one whose wand Malfoy just took, I believe she might be the Death Eater who escaped from Azkaban, Bellatrix Lestrange." "Is it possible, Atticus?" Even without Harry's prior warning, Remus had grown suspicious of the woman. Over a decade ago, they had confronted these infamous Death Eaters under Voldemort. Even among those deranged Death Eaters, Bellatrix was notorious. The woman's frenzied behavior just now closely resembled Bellatrix Lestrange. Could it be polyjuice potion or advanced human transfiguration? Remus inquired solemnly, lowering his voice. "Perhaps, but I didn't notice any flaws," Atticus replied, watching the Malfoy group's retreating figures vanish into the light and shadow. A strange light flickered in his eyes, but he quickly masked his expression and met Harry's gaze with a hint of caution. "By the way, what did you want to discuss with me, Harry?" End of this chapter. Chapter 1133. A hint. You really believe it? Yes, Harry. In the dimly lit basement kitchen of the old Blake house, Atticus Blaine sat at the long table, his eyes lowered to his intertwined fingers resting on his knees. He answered Harry's question with a calm and precise tone. "Professor Dumbledore and I both fully believe that Professor Snape is on our side. I hope you can also trust Professor Snape more." "Trust Snape more?" Harry's anger flared up again, almost involuntarily. "But what I saw—" "As for what you saw, Harry," Atticus raised his voice slightly, looking at Harry with a meaningful gaze. "I'm not questioning their authenticity, but Harry, I suggest you don't rely too much on getting information from those visions." "Don't rely on those illusions? What does this have to do with anything?" Harry thought angrily. He couldn't understand why the usually sharp Professor Blaine seemed so obtuse. Just like that morning at Gringotts, when Remus suspected the woman named Bessel was not who she claimed to be, yet Professor Blaine turned a blind eye. All right. Harry was trying to think of a way to make Professor Blaine take the information he was conveying seriously, but before he could, Professor Blaine, who was sitting across the table, suddenly sighed in relief, stretched his shoulders, and stood up. "I have to get back to the Ministry, Harry." Even Headmaster Dumbledore is advising Minister Bones. I can't afford to be lazy for too long. You know what I mean. Before Harry could fully process this, Professor Blaine had left the table, walked down the stairs, and opened the wooden door. Remus and the others, who were waiting in the hallway, approached immediately. "You guys are done talking, Harry." "Don't worry, it's no big deal." Atticus smiled and said, "Just make sure to get some rest. So, I'm heading back to the department now." "Won't you stay for lunch, Atticus?" Mrs. Weasley asked, a hint of reluctance in her voice. "I'm afraid I don't have the time," Atticus replied with an apologetic smile, then turned to Remus. "Dumbledore mentioned that he hopes the Order of the Phoenix can also contribute. Although this goes against my original intention, since you all wish to help, it's not my place to stop it. The details of the mission have been given to Kingsley. He will inform you at the meeting tonight." Remus nodded solemnly. After a moment's silence, Atticus added carefully, "I think you know." "We are all aware of the dangers involved, Atticus," Remus replied, his expression grave. With nothing more to say, Atticus smiled at the young wizards behind the two adults, whose eyes were darting around curiously. "Well, have a nice summer vacation." With that, he vanished before their eyes. Taking a deep breath, Mrs. Weasley walked over and gently put her arm around Harry's shoulders. "Go ahead, go upstairs with Ron and Hermione and rest for a while. You can have lunch later." Remus also patted Harry's shoulder. "Since Atticus said your scar is no big deal, I think you don't need to worry too much." Harry nodded sullenly, choosing not to argue further. Perhaps sensing that the three of them had something important to discuss, Fred and George did not linger on the third floor, and Ginny followed the twins directly to the fourth floor. "What did Professor Blaine just say to Remus?" Ron asked eagerly as they entered the room. Harry collapsed onto the bed, letting the pale sunlight wash over his face, a feeling of distrust gnawing at his heart. "I think it's about transporting the gold from the vaults of wanted Death Eaters," Hermione said, her face pale. "You certainly can't expect you-know-who to get the Death Eaters to surrender voluntarily, right?" Ron's lips moved as if to speak, but he suddenly thought of something, his face turning pale as he sat on the edge of his bed, falling silent. "Harry, what did Professor Blaine say about your scar?" Hermione asked, sitting next to Harry and removing the wristwatch that had been digging into her skin. Harry had covered her eyes, looking at him with concern. "He warned me not to rely too much on the information I got from those visions." Harry hesitated, but given that it was Hermione, he decided to say more. However, as soon as he began, he couldn't contain his anger and sat up abruptly from the bed. "You make it sound like I want to see those things. My scar hurts, and I can't control it, right?" Harry paced the room, seething. "He knows perfectly well that what I see is real, but he just doesn't take it seriously. But he even advised me to trust Snape more. It's absurd. In my opinion, letting Snape into the Order of the Phoenix is Dumbledore's foolishness." "I mean," Harry gasped, "Professor Dumbledore is too kind, and that's why Snape deceived him." "But since Professor Blaine also—" Ron, intimidated by Harry's tone, spoke nervously. "That's because," Harry said, pursing his lips. "We all know that Professor Blaine received a lot of support from Snape when he was at Hogwarts. Snape exploited Professor Blaine's gratitude." Harry, Hermione, who had been deep in thought, suddenly looked up. Harry's anger only intensified the worry in her brown eyes. "Are you saying that Professor Blaine doesn't want you to rely too much on those visions for information?" "Yes." Harry stopped and looked at Hermione, frowning. "Does he think I'm confused by the pain?" Hermione bit her lip, but remained silent. The old house was enveloped in a gloomy atmosphere all day. It wasn't until dinner that Sirius, who rarely came home, managed to bring a smile to Harry's stern face. "As you know, I'm now responsible for protecting Minister Bones." Sirius, who was devouring his food, explained vaguely in response to Harry and the others' questions. "I'm accompanying Minister Bones to calm the agitated workers. The Death Eaters will definitely want to kill her, so I must stay with her." "So how did you find the time to come back, Sirius?" Remus asked from across the table. "She's staying in the Ministry now. She won't go out before the end of the month. Atticus and Dumbledore are both in the Ministry now. Even Voldemort wouldn't dare to storm the Ministry recklessly, right?" Sirius said, looking at Harry. And I had to come back to see you, Harry. Atticus told me what happened this morning. Before Harry could ask Sirius for his opinion, Sirius suddenly sneered in the dim candlelight. "Ha! I'm disgusted that Malfoy wants to reclaim the gold my mother left to my dear cousin. Atticus really came up with a good idea. I'd rather the Black family's wealth contribute to the wizarding world." "That's not the point, Sirius. Did Professor Blaine tell you about what I saw?" Several children at the table cast concerned glances at Sirius. Sirius paused, the half-skewered sausage hovering near his mouth. He exchanged a look with Remus. "If you mean the accusation you made against Snape," Sirius hesitated. "To be honest, I'm just like you. I don't believe that the snot monster will completely change his evil ways, but since Atticus—" Seeing Harry's face suddenly darken, Sirius paused. "Of course, I believe that Atticus doesn't care about your opinion at all, Harry. I heard that he doesn't intend to let Snape participate in the mission the day after tomorrow." "Is that so?" Harry raised his eyebrows, slightly surprised. "And you, Sirius?" Remus asked. "Did he let you in?" Dumbledore discussed it with Alastor. They both knew the danger of this escort. Therefore, even in the Order of the Phoenix, only those with extraordinary skills would be allowed to participate. Sirius said with a hint of pride, "I'm definitely one of them." End of this chapter. Chapter 1134, The Suicide Note. The kitchen of the old Blake house was bustling with people, each one weighed down by the looming threat of war. A sudden, sharp noise drew everyone's attention to the wooden door at the top of the stairs. With a creak, Kingsley Shacklebolt stepped into view. "How's it going, Kingsley?" Remus asked, rising from the head of the long table. He smiled warmly at Kingsley, who was greeting everyone. "I mean, what's it like being the head of the Auror office?" "I'm sorry I'm late," Kingsley sighed, shaking his head. His usually steady voice carried a hint of hoarseness and fatigue. "I just came from Upper Flagley. The Muggle police there were conducting a census in a village where wizards and Muggles coexist. They discovered an elderly woman who lived alone was missing, and there were bloodstains in her house. The Muggle police suspect a burglary, with the murderer disposing of the body afterward." Kingsley pulled up a chair, addressing the attentive crowd. "But the Ministry knows that the old woman was a witch." "Any sign of the dark mark, Kingsley?" Alastor bellowed. "No," Kingsley replied, shaking his head. "I personally examined the house and believe a highly skilled dark wizard was involved." He sighed softly. "Murders and robberies are rampant, and even though Minister Bones had the foresight to expand the department's strike force, we still lack manpower." "These days, I follow Amelia closely," Sirius said, clasping his hands and resting his chin on them. "She's deeply concerned about the rising crime rate, but she can't spare enough people to guard every wizarding area. Only places with dense wizard populations, like Diagon Alley, Hogsmeade, and St. Mungo's, have stationed guards. These dark wizards are like sewer rats. They're everywhere." Alastor growled, his nose twitching. "Has Atticus and Albus put their clever minds to work?" Alastor continued. "I discussed this with Atticus yesterday," Mr. Weasley said, gently rubbing his brow. "He has some ideas, but he seems hesitant. You know, his methods are often quite drastic, and they might not suit the current situation." Silence fell over the room. The wizarding world was in dire straits. Although Voldemort and his Death Eaters were temporarily inactive, local and foreign dark elements were causing chaos, either spontaneously or in an organized manner. The public security situation had not improved since Fudge's tenure. In fact, it had worsened. Atticus's decisive and fierce methods in elevating Amelia to power had caused quite a stir. Domestically, the pure-blood wizarding families, who controlled the economic lifeline, were exacerbating the situation. Internationally, the coup at the British Ministry of Magic had significant repercussions for political organizations, workshops, and businesses across the European wizarding world. Foreign investors were wary of doing business in Britain, despite Atticus Blaine and Albus Dumbledore's involvement in the coup. People were watching and waiting, and capitalists feared that the methods used by Atticus and the British ministry to deal with Azkaban escapees might be turned on them. After all, which family didn't have some skeletons in their closet? In short, I don't expect this situation to improve in the short term, Kingsley said, sighing once more before gathering his resolve. Atticus Blaine gazed intently at the members of the Order of the Phoenix, his eyes filled with seriousness. Let's discuss the escort scheduled for the day after tomorrow. Atticus, Albus, and Minister Bones convened a meeting specifically for this matter. What are their plans? Bill inquired anxiously. I've heard from my friends at Gringotts that they've started discreetly organizing the gold in the underground vault. That's correct, Kingsley affirmed with a nod. Here's the plan. The morning after tomorrow at 6, 7, and 8, the Transport Department will dispatch 3 Hogwarts Express trains to stop at Diagon Alley Station as scheduled. These trains will be used to transport the gold to Low and Dawn. The first train will be escorted by the Ministry's Aurors. The Order of the Phoenix will oversee the second express, and for the third. Kingsley hesitated. The Ministry has enlisted some powerful bounty wizards. Bounty wizards? Remus asked, surprised, as the other members of the Order of the Phoenix began discussing the Ministry's arrangement. However, Remus soon realized the origin of these bounty wizards. He cleared his throat lightly. What will we do with the gold once it arrives in London? How will we manage such a large sum? Atticus mentioned he would meet at King's Cross with additional hitters, Kingsley replied. And what about Albus? Alastor asked gruffly. What's his plan? Minister Bones has requested Albus to remain at the Ministry, Kingsley continued. To ensure the gold reaches the Ministry safely, all strikers and aurors have been deployed. If Voldemort plans to retaliate, it could be problematic. Therefore, someone must be responsible for the Ministry's security. During the tense meeting, the members of the Order of the Phoenix engaged in a heated discussion about the upcoming operation. They meticulously examined and debated every detail, which thrilled Harry and others eavesdropping upstairs. The Ministry will seal off Diagon Alley from all directions for 3 hours, Kingsley stated. Before anyone realized it, night had fallen. Rising from his chair, Kingsley concluded, the Transport Department will strictly regulate the Flu network to prevent unauthorized access to Diagon Alley via fireplaces. Anti-apparition charms will be in place to block apparition, and port keys will be closely monitored. The moon hung high in the sky, casting its glow over the endless wilderness outside the city, accompanied by the incessant chirping of insects. As the meeting concluded, the members of the Order of the Phoenix departed one by one, leaving only the Weasleys and Remus, who were temporarily staying in the house. Sirius waved his wand, summoning a bottle of whiskey that appeared mid-air and landed in his hand. After pouring drinks for the remaining 3 in the kitchen, Sirius raised his glass and downed it in one gulp. "How's Amelia doing?" he asked, exhaling deeply and turning to Remus. "She went to Germany on business," Remus replied. "Due to Fudge's issues, some of our suppliers are a bit concerned. Amelia went to negotiate with them on my behalf." Sirius nodded, falling silent. "She's a remarkable witch," Remus remarked after a moment's hesitation, glancing at Sirius. "If you think she's nice," Sirius began, taking a breath and shaking his head slightly. "We'll discuss this later, Remus." He then turned to Mrs. Weasley. "Molly, could you do me a small favor?" Mrs. Weasley frowned. "That's unusual, Sirius. You're not usually so polite." Sirius didn't respond immediately. Under the dim light, the sharpness in his eyes seemed softened. Smiling, he reached into his pocket. After a moment, he pulled out a thick letter, rubbing it with his fingertips before handing it to Mrs. Weasley. "Could you please deliver this for me? Should we pass it on to Sirius?" Mrs. Weasley asked hesitantly, her eyes fixed on him. Several others in the room turned their attention to Sirius, who appeared somewhat uneasy. "It's for Harry," Sirius replied calmly. "If I don't return by the day after tomorrow, please give this letter to him." In the dimly lit room on the 4th floor, the atmosphere was tense. Hermione, Ron, the twins, and Ginny watched in silence as Harry, his face pale, let the extendable ear slip from his grasp. He staggered backward, his back colliding heavily with the wall. End of this chapter. Chapter 1135, The Tranquility Before the Storm. The morning light was dim, with the east on the brink of dawn. A long and torturous night had just passed, and the sunlight, pale gold with a hint of gray-green, struggled to evaporate the thin mist lingering in the air. Woo, woo. A line of thick white smoke curled up into the sky, mingling with a few floating clouds as 3 whistles pierced the sky, shattering the silence that enveloped Diagon Alley. Suddenly, the deserted Diagon Alley awoke from its slumber. On the central cobblestone street, 2 rows of shops with closed doors swung open wide, and from each shop a striker wearing a gray windbreaker and a solemn expression emerged. These well-trained strikers stood upright in front of the shops, wands in hand, their sharp eyes missing nothing on the street before them. Swish! The train's whistle continued to echo over Diagon Alley. At Diagon Alley Station, about 30 strikers on flying broomsticks took to the air. After reaching an altitude of approximately 200 feet, they ceased climbing. Quickly adjusting their formation in mid-air, they lined up horizontally, maintaining a distance of about 200 feet between each other. Once their formation stabilized, the team of strikers began a slow forward movement, conducting a thorough aerial inspection of Diagon Alley with the main road as their central axis. The solemn atmosphere in the cool morning air caused the neatly arranged carriages on the street to become restless and agitated. "Mr. Shacklebolt." An orar hurried out of the temporarily requisitioned leaky cauldron. Under the watchful eyes of many colleagues, he quickly ran towards the majestic and luxurious white building of Gringotts, stopping at the base of the marble stairs. "How's it going?" Kingsley, standing amidst a group of people, immediately turned his attention to the orar. "The transport department has begun sealing off all the fireplaces in Diagon Alley. From now on, no one can reach here via the flue network." Kingsley's gloomy expression eased slightly. He raised his wand and shot a cluster of blue fireworks into the sky. Soon, 4 fireworks shot up from the 4 corners of a large rectangular area. "The anti-apparition charm has been deployed." Kingsley turned to Alastor, who stood beside him with a cane, his blue eyes darting around. "This is an anti-apparition spell from the Ministry of Teachings of Atticus Blaine that he has improved upon. It has no effect on the teleportation magic of goblins or house elves." "Atticus always does things perfectly," Alastor laughed gruffly. "But we still can't let our guard down. If I were a Death Eater, I would choose to take action on the road." Kingsley nodded and sighed. "I have never experienced such a significant operation by the Ministry. If the Ministry had shown such determination last time, when you-know-who first began to stir in the wizarding world, he might not have caused such great harm." Albus did warn the Ministry at the time, but no one took it seriously, Alastor said disdainfully. "Among the recent ministers of magic, only Bones looks respectable." "Minister Bones would be pleased to hear you say that, Alastor." Shrouded in darkness, Sirius and Remus walked out side by side, followed by Tonks, Bill, and others. Remus smiled, then glanced at his watch and narrowed his eyes. "I think it's time, Kingsley." "Then let's get started," Kingsley said, raising his wand into the air once more, sending out a stream of green fireworks. The solemn atmosphere in Diagon Alley grew even more tense, as suffocating as a taut bowstring. The Order of the Phoenix and the Aurors, standing at the door, stepped aside, and the goblins from Gringotts emerged from the hall, escorting. The wooden boxes floated ominously, each as large as 2 or 3 Hogwarts students' suitcases. When they landed on the carriage, they produced a heart-stopping thud. Initially, the azure sky promised a pleasant day, but soon a heavy cloud drifted in, casting a shadow over Diagon Alley. Since Atticus Blaine began managing the learning machine workshop for Amos Star, Remus had finally escaped his previously unstable life and swiftly ascended the ranks of the European wizarding elite. Yet, despite his exposure to wealth, Remus couldn't hide his astonishment as treasure chests were loaded onto the carriage, seemingly endless like a mountain spring. "Whose vault is this?" Remus asked, turning to Kingsley in disbelief. "The first shipment is from the Caros, Antonin Dolohov, and Traversam vaults," Kingsley explained. "The second group includes Rosier, Selwyn, Avery, and others. The rest are in the third group." "The descendants of these pure-blood wizard families are wealthier than I ever imagined," Remus remarked, shaking his head in awe. "They're not even the richest," Sirius replied calmly. "When I was in school, my father took me to the Black family's vault. The gold here doesn't compare to that." "I never quite understood," Bill said, gazing at the boxes with a hint of melancholy. "How did they amass so much gold?" "Extortion and plunder," Sirius replied disdainfully. "The true wealth of these ancient families isn't just gold. They monopolize the workshops essential to everyday life, generating endless wealth. Most ordinary people in the magical world work for these families their entire lives. It's been this way for centuries. Despite the goblins' efficiency, it took over 20 minutes to load more than 100 large wooden boxes containing treasures worth no less than 2 million gold galleons onto the carriage. According to the plan, I'll lead the Aurors to escort the first train, Kingsley said, looking seriously at Alastor. The next column is yours, Alastor. Relax, Kingsley, Alastor sniffed. I won't give those despicable Death Eaters any chance. The heavy carriage, laden with wooden boxes, rolled over the cobblestone road, leaving clear tracks behind. Sk-sk, Tonks exclaimed, watching the convoy depart. With such a large sum of gold, I wonder what the ministry will do with it. I heard Atticus mention it, Sirius shrugged. He suggested to Minister Bones that ministry employees' salaries be increased. The excitement turned Tonks's hair a vibrant orange red. A pay raise! Oh, that's great! I've always wanted to buy myself a flying broom. That's something you'll have to wait for until you survive today. Alastor roared, displeased. Always be alert. Seeing Tonks's nonchalance, Remus gently added, Alastor is right, Tonks. Voldemort won't sit idly by while the Ministry takes his Death Eaters' gold. That would be a complete loss of face for him. But it's unlikely the Death Eaters would act in Diagon Alley, right? Tonks said cheerfully. This is the most heavily guarded area during the entire transportation process. The Ministry has eliminated all teleportation methods to Diagon Alley. It's also unlikely they'll act in London, as Atticus is guarding King's Cross Station. In my opinion, they're most likely to strike halfway. Don't underestimate the Dark Lord's cunning, Alastor warned, limping down the marble steps and patrolling the street. Half of the Ministry of Magic's strikers were on high alert, ready for any threat. Aurors patrolling the streets joined Kingsley in escorting the first train. Half of the remaining forces were assigned to accompany the Order of the Phoenix in safeguarding the second train. The final group would be protected on the third train by bounty wizards hired by the Ministry. The convoy of carriages that had delivered the gold to the station made its way back to the entrance of Gringotts. As the last sharp whistle pierced the sky, the first train finally departed. End of this chapter. Chapter 1, 1136. Shock. Everyone knew what was going to happen today. Many had anticipated it ever since Atticus Blaine announced the disciplinary measures against the escaped Death Eaters at a press conference. However, no one could precisely predict where the mistake would occur. As time passed, the dark clouds over Diagon Alley thickened and moisture mingled with the scorching air. Goblins were busy loading the second batch of gold onto the carriage. Members of the Order of the Phoenix dispersed, patrolling around the convoy. A striker hurriedly left the leaky cauldron, rushing to Alastor under the watchful eyes of many. Mr. Moody, there's news from the Ministry. In 15 minutes, the bounty wizards escorting the third train will arrive, the striker reported. Did the folks from the traffic division find anything? Alastor asked, more concerned about potential loopholes in the Ministry's obstacles than the mysterious bounty wizards who had yet to appear. So far, no one has been detected trying to forcibly use the Flu Network to enter Diagon Alley, the Auror replied. What about Kingsley? Craft? Tonks called out from 50 feet away, her voice tinged with nervousness. Is everything all right with his car? No bad news for now, Tonks, answered the wizard named Craft. Remus looked up at the Aurors circling over Diagon Alley, his brows furrowed deeply. Something doesn't feel right, Remus, Sirius said, joining him with a serious expression. Remus nodded, understanding Sirius's unease. It was too peaceful. To prepare for today's transfer, the Ministry had pooled the wisdom of many, including Atticus, to devise a detailed plan. Diagon Alley was fortified like an iron barrel. There were also escorts accompanying the train, ready to signal at the first sign of an ambush. Atticus himself was guarding King's Cross Station. If the Order of the Phoenix wanted to hijack the vault, they would find no easy solution with such security measures in place. But those who had fought against Voldemort knew he wouldn't remain silent after such a provocation from Atticus. What exactly were Voldemort and the Death Eaters planning? The uncertainty gnawed at the members of the Order of the Phoenix, leaving them feeling so uneasy they could almost taste the tension. Suddenly, Sirius's brow furrowed. Do you think the bounty wizards the Ministry found might already have problems? In my opinion, they shouldn't, Remus replied, his mouth twitching slightly. He knew the nature of bounty wizards well. Atticus would have bound them with the strictest contracts. Compared to the mixed group of strikers involved in the escort mission, those bounty wizards were more trustworthy. In the suffocating silence, the members of the Order of the Phoenix endured another 10 minutes. The fresh air flowing through his nostrils made Thanatos, who had been imprisoned for a week, feel a sense of relief. He breathed deeply, dispelling the depression in his heart and the fatigue in his body. Confinement. Yes, it was indeed confinement. As a seasoned bounty wizard in the underground world, Thanatos considered himself experienced. Yet, even he had never encountered such a peculiar task. Escorting cargo was not uncommon, but it was the first time he had seen a requirement to assemble and cut off all contact a week before the mission began. If it weren't for the fact, the person who assigned this task was the reliable Foley. If it weren't for the unimaginably generous reward attached to this mission, and the condition that even if the mission failed, the employer would still pay the full reward, Atticus Blaine would have avoided it entirely. The contract didn't specify the actual value of the goods. It only required delivering them to a designated location, with a high likelihood of hijacking along the way. If not for his growing strength, Atticus would have steered clear of this mission, which reeked of conspiracy. Doubts about the mission flitted through Atticus's mind for less than a second before he picked up his cane and quickly surveyed his surroundings. "This is Diagon Alley?" he exclaimed. The familiar streets and shuttered shops on either side made it unmistakable. Others around him echoed his surprise. Led by Foley, more than 20 fierce-looking bounty wizards had been transported to the streets using portkeys specially authorized by the Ministry of Magic. Their sudden appearance immediately caught the attention of the Ministry's enforcers and the Order of the Phoenix members stationed there. "Oh, it's you lot." Alastor, momentarily speechless, took a few seconds to process the sight of the formidable group. He sniffed the air, the familiar scent from these individuals bringing a look of realization to his face. Leaning on his crutches, Alastor limped over to Kakus Foley, who was approaching him, scrutinizing Foley with a discerning gaze. "It seems the Ministry under Minister Bones is far more lenient than in my day," Alastor remarked with a wry smile. Before Foley could respond, a voice rang out from behind him. Among the bounty wizards, all clad in black cloaks and masks of various designs, one wizard with a mask featuring pale golden vertical stripes shouted, his voice a mix of fear and anger. "Mad-Eye Moody," he cried. "Sirius Black, striker in Tonks Nymphadora's department. Foley, this is a trap, isn't it? You've conspired with the Ministry to capture us all at once." "You betrayed us, Foley. Mark my words, if I survive, the Foley family will never know peace," he continued. "Damn it, apparition doesn't work. We've been ambushed by aurors." The accusations rolled in like waves, with nearly every bounty wizard cursing Foley and his family. Amidst the chaos, Atticus remained calm. Even with the legendary Auror Alastor and so many experts present, he was confident in his ability to fight his way out if necessary. However, he chose to restrain himself for the moment, watching Foley with a cold gaze, waiting for an explanation. If the answer didn't satisfy him, "What's all the fuss about, gentlemen?" Foley asked, unfazed by the threats. This reaction was anticipated. "The Ministry of Magic originally issued this transport mission," he explained candidly. The revelation that the Ministry had hired these wizards, who often skirted the edges of legality, to carry out the task was shocking. The crowd's anger subsided, and the bounty wizards, who had been ready to fight, paused. "The Ministry has commissioned you to escort a large amount of gold to London. Atticus Blaine will meet you at King's Cross Station," Foley continued. "Atticus Blaine?" The bounty wizards began to murmur again. "Why would the Ministry turn to us?" the wizard with the golden mask asked, his voice stern but betraying a hint of uncertainty. "Aren't there enough wizards in the Ministry of Magic?" "Because of the sheer volume of gold," Foley replied, his voice steady amidst the rising tension. "Do you understand? The Ministry needs us to escort other trains, Typhire," Alastor bellowed, slamming his fist into the ground as he glared at the golden-robed wizard. You're such a coward. Either do your job properly, or I'll send you to Azkaban right now. You, Moody, you recognized me, the golden-patterned wizard stammered, his voice tinged with fear as he met the gaze of Moody's magical eye. I never said I wouldn't do it. We've all signed the contract, but I need to be sure this isn't a trap. Now you understand, Moody growled, stepping closer to the bounty wizards with a menacing air. His gaze swept over them, and each one instinctively lowered their head, knowing that their attempts to conceal their identities were futile against Moody's magical eye. Seeing no one dared to argue, Alastor snorted dismissively, his magical eye scanning the room once more. Outside, a burst of fireworks from Diagon Alley Station lit up the gloomy sky. Let's go, it's our turn, Alastor barked, his voice gruff and commanding. End of this chapter. Chapter 1137. The War Begins. The gray-yellow buildings of Diagon Alley gradually receded into the distance as the rhythmic roar of the Hogwarts Express filled the air. As the lush green of the countryside came into view, the train had already left the oppressive dark clouds behind. The train consisted of 10 carriages, 9 of which had been cleared of seats to serve as freight cars. Only one dining car had been transformed into a temporary command center. A paper airplane, marked with a stamp on its wing, flew through the open window into the speeding train. Alastor quickly caught it and unfolded the message. A letter from Kingsley, he announced. They'll be at King's Cross Station in 10 minutes. This was undoubtedly good news. Once the train arrived in London, Atticus Blaine would intervene, and any Death Eater conspiracies would have to be reconsidered. However, Remus, Alastor's deputy and trusted advisor, did not share the same relief. His expression was grave. Doesn't something feel off to you, Alastor? Remus asked, his voice tinged with concern. The Ministry's decision to send the gold to London in 3 separate trains was likely to prevent too much being taken in an attack. But we all know Voldemort. He acts in response to provocation, not to help the Death Eaters regain their wealth. You've read my mind, Remus. Alastor's magical eye scanned through several carriages, confirming that the path ahead was clear, yet his grip on his cane remained firm. I doubt he'll let all 3 trains pass unscathed. It's his style, unless he has another plan. Remus quickly grasped Mad Eye's implication. You think he might be feigning an attack in one direction while striking elsewhere? But with Albus stationed at the Ministry of Magic, surely he knows that. Silence fell between them, broken only by the wind rushing through the open windows, whistling in their ears. For now, we can only... Remus began, but his words were cut short. Boom! A sudden, dull thunderclap echoed amid the whistling wind. Remus and Alastor were momentarily stunned before they rushed to the window. It's Diagon Alley! Remus exclaimed. Though he couldn't see clearly, Alastor's magical eye discerned thick smoke rising from Diagon Alley. His already fierce expression twisted further in anger. Those scumbags are making their move, he shouted. What do we do now, Alastor? Remus asked, the tension of the morning igniting into urgency. Before Alastor could respond, a black shadow darted from a window several carriages away, racing against the wind back toward Diagon Alley. Don't be impulsive, Sirius, Alastor roared, but his voice was lost in the rumble of the train and the wind. Damn it, Alastor cursed, slamming his cane on the floor. He turned to Remus, whose face mirrored his own frustration. Send a message to Kingsley and Atticus, Remus. I'm going after that reckless fool. I'm worried those bounty wizards can't handle it alone, Alastor. They really need support, Remus said, torn between frustration and admiration for Sirius's boldness. Then Sirius and I will go to provide assistance, support, and you and the rest of the team will be responsible for continuing to escort this train, Alastor shouted. Inform everyone remaining in the car that no one is allowed to leave without permission. With that, he swiftly grabbed the broom leaning against the bar, smashed the car window with a decisive swing, and, under Remus's anxious gaze, soared into the vast wasteland. The carriage, laden with gold coins, resumed its journey, slowly making its way toward Hogsmeade Station, which lay at the edge of their vision. According to the prearranged personnel list, 1/3 of the strikers from the shops lining the street followed the convoy, while the rest quickly gathered and assembled on the marble steps in front of Gringotts. You better explain this to me, Foley. Thanatos, a towering figure among the crowd, was the first to confront him. He roughly shoved aside his colleagues, approached Kakus with an aggressive demeanor, and seized his collar. "Why did the Ministry of Magic assign us to escort gold from Gringotts?" "I thought I had addressed this issue earlier, Thanatos," Kakus replied, accustomed to the threats from these bloodthirsty wizards. Despite Thanatos' fierce demeanor, Kakus managed a bitter smile. "The gold needs to be transported to London." "Don't try to fool me, Foley. What's really going on?" Thanatos demanded fiercely. "Why is the Ministry taking gold from Gringotts? Whose gold is it, and what happened during the days we were cut off from the outside world?" "Sir, although I don't know who you are." Before Kakus could respond, one of the remaining strikers stepped forward, glaring at Thanatos. "Mr. Foley is the commander in charge of escorting the third train. I suggest you show him some respect." "Step aside, boy," Thanatos ordered bluntly, "unless you want to become part of my collection after you're dead." "Gentlemen, I can explain," Foley interjected, turning to the striker with a grateful smile. He gestured for the others to remain calm before continuing. "The gold belonged to a Death Eater who escaped from Azkaban." A cold wind swept through, causing Thanatos to unconsciously release Foley's collar. All the bounty wizards stared at Foley with stunned expressions. "During the days you were detained, Mr. Blaine announced a message to the wizarding world," Kakus explained calmly. "He ordered all Death Eaters who escaped from Azkaban to surrender within a limited time. If they failed to comply, the Ministry of Magic would confiscate their wealth stored in Gringotts' vaults. Your mission is to protect the gold being transported back to the Ministry." The room fell silent as the bounty wizards absorbed the gravity of their task. Escorting the confiscated gold of Death Eaters was a perilous mission. "I'm quitting, Foley." Thanatos was the first to break the silence. "I refuse to accept this mission." "I'm sorry, Thanatos," Kakus replied politely, "but that's not an option. You've already signed a contract with the Ministry. You must ensure the safety of this wealth for the Ministry of Magic. You're well aware of the contract's binding nature." "You've signed your own death warrant, Foley." Typhel, who had been previously intimidated by Mad-Eye, regained his composure. He glared at Foley with murderous intent. "You've tricked us into opposing the Dark Lord, and your fate will be dire." Meanwhile, the unloading process at the station proceeded swiftly, and the carriage convoy returned to Gringotts' entrance. The goblins, indifferent to the conflict unfolding before them, diligently completed their tasks, quickly loading the final batch of treasure chests onto the carriage. Faced with Typhel's blatant threat, Foley no longer displayed the weakness he had shown earlier. Instead, he looked at them with a newfound resolve. The bounty wizards stood calmly, each one carefully selected by Atticus Blaine. "I just want to tell you all that," Foley began. "The reward for this mission is not just the payment outlined in the contract. There's something far more valuable at stake." "What is it?" Thanatos inquired, his eyes narrowing with curiosity. "After the plan to have you escort the gold was approved by the Ministry's high-level meeting, Mr. Blaine proposed that if you complete the task with full dedication, all your criminal records with the Ministry will be expunged. Furthermore, if you agree, the Ministry of Magic is willing to recruit all of you as official employees." "Join the Ministry of Magic? Become official employees?" Typher asked skeptically, though his surprise was evident. "You should know, Foley, that we are not wizards like you. Would the Ministry really employ people like us?" Foley was about to respond when something extraordinary occurred. A sudden, fierce storm erupted, catching the strikers and bounty wizards off guard. As they struggled to regain their footing, a deafening roar was followed by an even more violent gust of wind. Boom! The convoy of carriages parked in front of Gringotts was obliterated in an instant. The horses pulling the carriages were reduced to a crimson mist, and the shattered carriage frames and gold coins scattered through the air before plummeting to the ground. Through the golden and blood-red rain, Thanatos, the first to regain his composure, stared in disbelief at the night bus that had suddenly appeared in front of Gringotts' gate. He was momentarily stunned by the unexpected turn of events. End of this chapter. Chapter 1138. Destruction. Golden rain cascaded from the sky, filling the air with the clinking sounds of gold coins and objects hitting the ground. The scene was chaotic, Over a dozen horse-drawn carriages transporting gold lay shattered, and the horses pulling them had turned into a bloody mist before they could even neigh. The Ministry of Magic's strikers stood stunned, witnessing the carnage. These strikers, newly recruited after the ministry expanded its corps, had only undergone brief training and lacked real-world experience. In contrast, the bounty wizards from the underground world, accustomed to living on the edge, quickly recovered from their initial shock. They brandished their wands, smashing doors and walls, and sought refuge in the shops lining the cobblestone road. "Night bus?" Thanatos, hiding behind a bar, stared wide-eyed at the blood-splattered, three-decker bus parked in front of Gringotts. His eyes twitched with disbelief. The cunning of the Death Eaters was undeniable. The Ministry had surely sealed off Diagon Alley in anticipation of such an attack, disabling teleportation methods like apparition and the flu network. The ground would have been cleared and barriers erected. Yet, the Ministry hadn't anticipated the Death Eaters using the night bus. Thanatos gritted his teeth, determination flashing in his eyes. Staying put was a death sentence. Atticus Blaine had devised such a drastic plan to force the escaped Death Eaters to face justice. The mysterious man might even make a personal appearance in Diagon Alley for this. Just as Thanatos prepared to retreat, a burning sensation coursed through his body, as if his very blood was aflame, causing his expression to change drastically. "Damn it, Foley. Wait for me," he thought, gritting his teeth. The contract's effect was extraordinarily potent. Boom! Another explosion rocked the area, and a fierce wind swept through, destroying the shops near Gringotts like a whirlwind. Thanatos quickly raised his staff, conjuring a magical barrier to withstand the storm. Amidst the ferocious black tempest, numerous fluorescent magic shields, shaped like eggshells, illuminated the scene. The famous night bus of the British Ministry of Magic had been obliterated in the explosion, with a large, irregular piece of its body embedded deep in the towering stone pillar in front of Gringotts. Roar! The violent roar drew the attention of the bounty wizards, who had been cursing the Ministry of Magic and Foley, back to the battlefield. Thanatos' gaze pierced through the golden-red rain, fixing on the creature that had suddenly appeared. His face, hidden behind a mask, turned ashen. "Giant!" As the wind and waves gradually subsided, someone shouted in fear and disbelief. "Aren't there no purebred giants in Britain anymore? Where did these monsters come from?" Thanatos' mouth twitched. The answer was obvious. The giants had once allied with the mysterious man's army, and now, over a decade later, they had pledged their loyalty to him once more. Panic spread among the wizards at the sight of the massive creature on the battlefield. But the giants, towering at 25 feet, would not wait for the wizards to regain their composure. These rough, ugly behemoths, clad only in loincloths, roared ferociously and charged towards Gringotts like unstoppable siege machines. Boom! Amidst the earth-shattering shock, a giant raised his hand and tore down the first brass door of Gringotts, wielding it like a shield. With a thunderous roar, he charged directly into the marble hall of Gringotts. Another giant embraced a supporting marble pillar outside the bank. With a terrifying roar, the giant snapped the stone pillar, causing a collapse that sent billowing smoke and dust into the air. In just moments, two adult giants had nearly demolished half of Gringotts' magnificent hall. Watching this scene unfold, Thanatos stood numb behind a magical barrier. Amid the rumbling chaos, a faint, inconspicuous scream reached his ears. He turned to see, more than 100 feet away, a man engulfed, head in flames, his limbs flailing desperately in a futile attempt to extinguish the fire. Within seconds, the bounty wizard who had tried to flee was consumed by the magical flames. Thanatos almost cursed aloud, but it was pointless now. The giants weren't interested in the gold scattered on the ground. They were there solely for destruction. A dozen giants used whatever they could find. Some picked up the wreckage of the night bus, others grabbed boulders from the ground, and some swung broken marble columns. They rolled through the streets like a torrent, leaving collapsed houses and sunken ground in their wake. The bounty wizards were also targets for the giants. 3 giants roared and charged at them. A wizard with a magic shield at the front was swatted away by a giant, screaming as he flew 200 feet into the air before crashing through a shop roof, his fate uncertain. "Damn you beasts!" Typhel shouted. swinging his bone wand above his head. A deep blue magical light shot from the crystal ball encased in the bone, striking the cheek of the giant charging at him. The corrosive power of the magic was undeniable. The giant let out a pained roar as half of his rough face melted like wax, revealing blood-red flesh beneath. The melted skin hung grotesquely from his chin like a 1,000-layer pancake. "You won't die even from this." Typhal's smile beneath his gold-patterned mask turned to shock and anger. The injured giant staggered back but quickly regained his footing. His roar, emitted from his massive, foul-smelling mouth, created visible ripples in the air. Despite his melted eye sockets and dangling eyeballs, the giant fixed his remaining good eye on Typhal, hatred burning in his gaze. With another earth-shaking roar, the giant lunged forward, intent on devouring Typhal whole. Even the battle-hardened Typhal was momentarily stunned by the terrifying sight, a lapse that could prove fatal in a battlefield where life and death hinge on split-second decisions. As he regained his senses, the shadow of the giant's outstretched palm loomed over him. Despair flickered in Typhal's eyes. The powerful magic he had just unleashed, his specialty, hadn't even managed to kill the giant. At that moment, the magic coursing through his body left him unable to finish off the giant. Suddenly, a unique roar echoed across the battlefield. The giant poised to capture Typhal found himself immobilized. In a rage, he turned to discover a fire dragon skeleton had appeared behind him. 2 pitch-black flames burned ominously in the eye sockets of the dragon's skull. The fire blazed like the devil's inferno, a sight so terrifying that anyone who gazed upon it would be doomed. The skeletal fire dragon rose, its 2 front claws gripping the giant's shoulders, preventing it from bending over. The spectacle before the giant's eyes left it momentarily stunned. It had never encountered such a bizarre creature. "Go to hell!" Thanatos shouted, his eyes filled with malice as he raised his staff high. Black flames flickered in the eyes of the fire dragon under his control. One of its white claws released its grip on the giant's shoulder and, like a bolt of white lightning, sliced through the air with a sharp, piercing sound, plunging into the giant's bloody eye sockets. In the midst of the rumbling chaos, a profound silence fell. The giant's massive form, now devoid of strength, slowly collapsed to the ground, sending up a cloud of dust. "Well done, Thanatos," Typhal exclaimed, spitting on the ground with satisfaction. End of this chapter. Chapter 1139. A Fierce Battle. The giant's formidable fighting prowess needs no introduction. Towering and powerful, their skin is the most resistant to magic among all magical creatures. Most importantly, these terrifying beings are inherently brutal, love combat, and are natural warriors. It is no exaggeration to say that a dozen giants gathered together would form a formidable army. Even if all the elite members of the Ministry of Magic were assembled, they would likely struggle to defeat them without incurring significant losses. When this group of giants appeared on the battlefield, even the most battle-hardened bounty wizards lost their will to resist and fled without a fight. Thus, the brilliant teamwork between Typhir and Thanatos, which resulted in the death of a giant, immediately drew cheers from all directions. Bounty wizards are known for their adaptability, and upon realizing they were bound by contract with no chance of escaping unscathed, they threw themselves into a life-and-death struggle with the giants. "Well done, Thanatos," Typhir exclaimed, recovering from the shock. "With your record of killing this giant, no one will dare to mess with you in the future." "Future?" Thanatos panted, a wry smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I just hope I survive today." Giants are not naturally social creatures. These powerful beings prefer solitude but are forced to live in groups due to the harsh external environment. However, this does not mean they are indifferent to the death of their kin. A mournful roar echoed across the battlefield as 8 giants, filled with fierce determination, charged toward the skeletal fire dragon. Thanatos and Typhir, terrified, transformed into gray mist and retreated 200 feet. Various colorful and shrill curses exploded against the advancing giants, but only a few managed to penetrate their defenses and inflict damage. These attacks, however, only served to enrage the giants further. Thanatos watched helplessly as the 8 frenzied giants descended like ravenous wolves upon the skeletal fire dragon he had painstakingly assembled. In an instant, the dragon, which had just achieved something miraculous, was reduced to fragments under the giant's massive fists. One giant ripped out the dragon's spine and wielded it like a whip against a wizard attacking them. The unfortunate wizard didn't even have time to scream before being reduced to a pool of rotting flesh and blood. Within 2 minutes of the giant's arrival, at least a dozen people, including members of the Ministry of Magic's strike team, lay dead. With a deafening roar, the last remaining structure within half a mile, the grand and majestic Hall of Gringotts, collapsed in a cloud of smoke and dust, its ruins littered with the dismembered limbs of goblins. Avada Kedavra! A voice pierced the smoke-filled sky, followed by a rough roar. A beam of green cursed light cut through the dust, striking a giant pursuing Thanatos and Typhir. The moment the giant was hit by the death curse, his steps faltered as if he were drunk. After staggering a few steps, he collapsed with a thunderous crash. Yet the giant was not dead. He appeared severely weakened, his eyes bloodshot and his breathing labored. Mad-Eye! Sirius, astride a flying broom, stared in shock at Alastor beside him. The ministry hasn't authorized the use of the unforgivable curses. Then you. Prepare to be crushed by these giants, Sirius. Alastor bellowed, his voice gruff and commanding. His eyes were locked onto the giant that had just been struck by the killing curse. With determination, he raised his wand to finish the job. Suddenly, a fierce gust of wind swept through the battlefield. Move, Alastor! Sirius called out urgently, swinging his broom handle to narrowly dodge an oncoming boulder. The massive rock crashed to the ground near Thanatos, sending a powerful shockwave that knocked him off his feet. Struggling to his feet from the crevice in the rock, Thanatos surveyed the chaotic scene, his expression darkening. The ministry's Rememe, 9 enforcers were still attempting to subdue the giants with standard spells like stunning charms, which proved utterly ineffective. Instead, they were being tossed around like ragdolls, scattering in all directions. In contrast, Thanatos' colleagues had adapted quickly. Realizing that solo efforts were futile against the giants, they formed small groups, working together to disperse the clustered behemoths before launching coordinated attacks. Mad-Eye Moody, who had just departed, showed remarkable bravery. He dared to use the killing curse against the giants, and Sirius, taking the cue, unleashed spells without regard for legality. Yet, even they were challenged by the giants' resilience. Despite their low intelligence, the giants had inherited survival tactics over millennia. The two giants battling Sirius and Mad-Eye had torn the large brass doors from Gringotts, wielding them as shields to deflect the onslaught of spells. They retaliated by hurling debris with immense force, turning the rubble into deadly projectiles. Protego! Sirius shouted, conjuring a magical barrier just in time to deflect the incoming debris. Despite his efforts, he was buffeted about on his broomstick like a leaf caught in an autumn gale. Mad-Eye deftly dodged another barrage of rubble, retaliating with the killing curse. The spell struck the makeshift shield with a resonant thud, but the giant behind remained unscathed. Getting clever, are we? Mad-Eye growled, maneuvering his broom to evade yet another wave of debris. The battlefield was a cacophony of chaos, with wizards' cries mingling with the giants' pained roars. Diagon Alley, once bustling with life, lay in ruins, its former prosperity obliterated. Amidst the turmoil, a fleeting thought of escape crossed Thanatos' mind. Yet the searing pain that coursed through his body quashed any notion of retreat. The giants had to be dealt with swiftly. A fierce determination ignited in Thanatos' eyes as he realized the gravity of the situation. The mysterious figure behind this attack surely had more in store than just these giants. The absence of Death Eaters and dark wizards was suspicious, and Thanatos refused to believe they were merely spectators. Should he use it? A moment of internal conflict flickered in Thanatos' eyes. The artifact he had acquired from Golden Viper had taken nearly a year to master, but he was confident it could decimate the giants. However, using it would leave him utterly vulnerable. Now's not the time for hesitation, Thanatos resolved, his mind made up. The threat of the Death Eaters and the mysterious figure loomed large, and the giants posed an immediate danger. With a decisive shout, Thanatos prepared to unleash his secret weapon. Atticus Blaine and Mad-Eye were locked in battle with the giants, soaring through the air on their flying broomsticks. "Let's make a deal," Thanatos shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The urgency in his tone caught the attention of both Mad-Eye and Atticus, who exchanged glances from afar. "What are you up to, Norris?" Moody bellowed, suspicion lacing his words. "Damn, Moody," Thanatos thought, his expression darkening. The man had seen right through him. That scoundrel Fly promised that if I complete this mission, my criminal record with the department will be wiped clean and I can remain there legitimately, right? Atticus was momentarily taken aback. The towering figure below was none other than Nolus Durman from the Department of Mysteries. "If you've got any tricks up your sleeve, now's the time to use them," Moody shouted. "Otherwise, the Ministry will only agree not to dock your pension, Norris." Moody, that insufferable bastard. Thanatos' face twisted with frustration. "You and Blaine have to ensure I get out of here alive," he demanded, his voice filled with desperation. With a deep breath, Thanatos raised his staff skyward. Crack! A deafening thunderclap echoed as black lightning struck the mountain of rubble and debris before him. A primordial roar reverberated through the skies above Diagon Alley, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of ancient times. End of this chapter. Chapter 1140, War 1. Endless black lightning struck the hill before Atticus Blaine. The immense power within the thunder and lightning distorted the air, making it appear hazy. A massive, indistinct black shadow, as large as a mountain, gradually emerged from the air, as if it had come from another dimension. The pressure in the atmosphere was overwhelming. Under such force, the giants, who had been rampaging uncontrollably, suddenly fell silent. With vacant, bewildered expressions, they stared at the towering black shadow, which loomed even larger than they were. A deafening roar pierced the air, akin to a massive boulder crashing into water, causing the atmosphere to ripple like waves. Black electric light crackled over the enormous, menacing skeleton. It was large enough to contain an adult, and its eye sockets, ablaze with ominous black flames, exuded a chilling aura that instilled fear in all who beheld it. As this godlike skeleton, radiating immense pressure, lowered its head, Sirius and Mad-Eye, caught in its gaze, instinctively held their breath. "This is too." The oppressive force slowly brought Sirius and Mad-Eye to the ground. Sirius cast a look of disbelief at Atticus Blaine, who was bent over, gasping for air. "This is the giant ancestor. Where did you get this, Norris? You actually hid this trick." Typhel, who had also been deceived, croaked in a hoarse, strained voice as he looked at Atticus. Atticus snorted arrogantly, attempting to straighten his posture, but managed only a few seconds before his back gave way, and he resumed gasping as if utterly spent. It seemed there was still a long journey ahead. The image of the Golden Viper flashed in Atticus's mind. That terrifying entity could not only defeat the Titan skeleton, but also erase the violent consciousness within it. In comparison, it had taken Atticus a year just to imprint his mark on this skeleton, which contained immense power, and to barely control it. "Kill them," Atticus commanded, raising his staff with great effort, feeling the magic within him draining away at an alarming rate. Boom! The Titan took a step forward, and the ground beneath it cracked violently. One giant was caught in the fissure and fell in. With each movement of the giant skeleton, a gust of malevolent wind followed. It bent down, clasped its terrifying white bony hands together, and seized another nearby giant. Bang! 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 The trapped giant pounded wildly, but it could not escape its grim fate. The skeleton giant lifted its bony hand high, and under the astonished gaze of wizards and giants alike, hurled the giant fiercely into the distance. Roars of fear echoed across the battlefield, as both sides watched in awe as the giant flew overhead, landing heavily half a mile away, raising a column of dust with a resounding thud. Gulp! In the deathly silence that followed, the sound of swallowing was heard simultaneously. Was there such a powerful wizard hidden within the Ministry? Sirius's lips tightened as he watched the panting Atticus, a hint of respect in his eyes. Boom, boom, boom. The skeleton giant took another step. It first kicked the giant struggling to climb out of the crack back into the ground, then strode toward the other giants. Although Sirius did not understand the giants' language, he could sense their roars were filled with fear of the colossal skeleton, which stood more than twice their height. Some giants instinctively retreated, trying to distance themselves from it, seemingly lacking the courage to confront it. But at that moment, at the other end of Diagon Alley, a giant wearing a goblin helmet suddenly let out an enraged roar. It appeared to be the leader of the group of giants, and the giants. The giants hesitated, unable to meet its gaze. Despite repeated urgings, they remained rooted in place, paralyzed by fear. The giant leader, frustrated by their inaction, let out a roar that seemed to shake the very heavens. It dropped its massive club and charged at the skeletal giant from the far end of the street like an out-of-control FAR-8 train. When they were just 30 feet apart, the leader leaped with a wild, unstoppable fury, crashing into the Titan's ribs with a thunderous impact. The collision was like a meteor striking the earth, and the skeletal giant crumbled with a deafening crash. The resulting shockwave and dust cloud obscured everything from view. Nearby wizards, including Sirius and Mad-Eye, were swept off their feet before they could react. Yet, amidst the swirling smoke and dust, the roars continued unabated. The air was filled with the heart-pounding sound of dull, relentless hammering. A chilling noise, like steel being twisted, echoed through the chaos, followed by a triumphant roar. The scattered giants throughout Diagon Alley were invigorated. Abandoning their skirmishes with the wizards, they converged on the skeletal giant with renewed fervor. "Damn it," muttered Thanatos, as he pushed aside the debris pinning him down and struggled to his feet. The impact had shattered his mask, but with Mad-Eye having already revealed his identity, he had nothing left to hide. He tore off the remnants of his mask, wiped the blood from his nose, and with a furious shout, raised his cane once more. The crystal ball atop it glowed ominously, and as he swung it through the air, visible ripples spread out like waves, accompanied by ghostly wails carried on the wind. The fierce roar dispelled the smoke and dust, revealing the Titan skeleton, now burdened with a dozen giants clinging to it, struggling to rise under Thanatos' control. With a sickening crunch, the Titan's skeletal hand seized a giant clambering onto its forehead, crushing it with brutal force. Blood rained down like a macabre shower. Above, the sky was a grim tapestry of swirling clouds, occasionally lit by flashes of lightning. The death of their kin ignited the giant's fury. They attacked the Titan skeleton with reckless abandon, heedless of their own safety. Yet, their rage was no match for the Titan's power. One by one, the giants were either knocked to the ground or hurled hundreds of feet away, landing with barely a breath left in them. The giant leader, wearing a fairy helmet, was impaled through the waist by the Titan's bony hand, staining the skeleton crimson with its blood. "Well done, Norris!" Moody exclaimed, extricating his legs from a crevice with great effort. He watched the giant leader's anguished cries as it hung from the bones, casting an admiring glance at Thanatos. "Call me Thanatos, you bastard Moody," Thanatos retorted breathlessly. Suddenly, his face turned ashen, and his expression froze. The Titan skeleton, as if struck by a petrification spell, became immobile. "What's happening, Thanatos?" Typhor, who had been observing the battle from behind a stone slab, shouted. "The giants are nearly defeated. Just hold on a little longer." Thanatos turned his stiff neck to glare at Typhor with a look of despair. In the next moment, he coughed up a mouthful of blood, his face as pale as parchment. With a resounding thud, Thanatos collapsed to the ground, and a black mist enveloped the Titan skeleton. As the mist dissipated, the once mighty Titan skeleton that had dominated the battlefield vanished without a trace. The power that had vanquished most of the giants also vanished. Boom! Before Atticus Blaine could fully comprehend the situation, darkness enveloped the scene. Alastor's expression shifted dramatically as he abruptly looked up, his magical eyes locking onto the swiftly descending storm clouds. These clouds churned violently, and tendrils of gray with black and gray tail flames unraveled from the mass above. From within these swirling clouds, a cacophony of deranged laughter echoed, each voice distinct yet equally unsettling. They hovered over the ruins, transforming the area into a spectral realm. Bang, bang, bang! After a series of deep, resonant explosions, the dark wizards, their faces twisted into grotesque smiles, revealed themselves before Atticus. Hiss! The sight of the dark wizard army, numbering in the hundreds, was enough to make even the battle-hardened Moody catch his breath. "Long time no see, my dear cousin." Bellatrix's shrill, maniacal laughter pierced the air, causing Atticus's face to darken with dread. End of this chapter.